Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 151 of Through the Years, the podcast reviews Ring of Honor show by show from the beginning. My name is Trevor Dame. I'm joined, as always, by the co-host, Matt Feuerstein. Matt, you have done another podcast recently. You were on Friends of the Show, the Q&T podcast with Tim. I listened to that show this week. I waited till this moment to tell you because why not be a weird friend who delays being supportive until he can say it on the air? Because that's normal. But I would say, as always, it is a dream of some people, I would say, and specifically me, podcasts with Matt without me. At the end of that episode, Tim talked about how he wished every episode of our show would be 5 hours. And you were like, well, the next episode will be long. I can't put your mind at ease, Matt. The notes on this episode are not nearly as long as the Respect is Earned episode. So
Thank God.
That at least we can put you at ease.
I hope all listeners noticed that when he was saying that he was waiting to compliment me for this, he didn't actually compliment anything about what I did on that podcast. Just so you know. But
Matt, you were, as always, delightful. I should also mention you were covering it with Tim All Out AEW pay-per-view,
yes.
And I thought you did a great job. As always, I think, even though I find you very charming on this show, somehow when you are removed from me, the charm factor goes up even more. You really work to impress, man.
This is classic Trevor Dame self-deprecation. I could compete with you, but I'm not going to try tonight because we have a lot of important work to do. Like Paul Rudd in the Celery Man, Tim and Eric sketch. We have a lot of important work to do.
I just rewatched that like a few days ago.
Yes. Well,
you know what's weird? Like, I don't remember. We should get to the show. I don't remember so many things. I remember when we were like, whenever Tim and Eric was like in our 20s or something.
And like the late 2000s, early 2010s. Yes.
Yeah, whatever that was. I remember you sending me like an instant message being like, "Do you watch Tim and Eric?" And I was like, "I just don't get it." And the funny thing is, it's like years and years later, I do get it. But like for some reason, I don't remember important things in my life. I remember you sending me that message.
Wow, I don't even remember that, but I'm proud of myself, and I'm glad that I sent it. And Tane, I could get into. I don't know what level of sad middle-aged man is somebody that just like starts a podcast by referencing that sketch multiple times. I don't know, but it's a high level, and I've achieved it, and I'm just going up from here.
Matt, if your bar for sad is referencing Tim and Eric on a podcast, I imagine there's you have company, you have friends, Matt. But
thank you.
Let's get to the very non-sad, very respectable job of doing the internet's at worst second favorite Ring of Honor review podcast. Today's show is covering Driven, and it took place June 23rd. 2007 at the Frontier Fieldhouse in Chicago, Illinois, in front of a reported crowd of I don't know how many fans, because like we talked about this on the last episode, the Observer did not have attendances for this weekend because they spent all their newsletter space on coverage of the Benoit tragedy. In fact, it was hard for me to find any other source for attendance on this one. I believe even Cage Match didn't have it. So I did find one source, which was from Chris Vedder's PW Torch live report, where he writes, and I quote, "The crowd's a legit 1,000 to 1,100. This is one of the biggest turnouts I've ever seen in this building." So the official Through the Years call is 1,000 fans. Matt, you doubt that? Matt, hello?
Sorry, I was muted.
Yes,
okay. So I can't doubt it too much, but you and I have watched a lot of these Chicago shows, all of them actually up to this point, and this definitely had more visible empty space in the bleachers than in the other ones that we've watched. I don't know if you noticed that, but I sure did multiple times.
Well, there is maybe one reason for that, but I do agree, and I will go to an anonymous PW Torch live report for this, Matt. This anonymous person, they did not want to be credited. They shared, quote, "They set up the Frontier Fieldhouse differently for the pay-per-view. They curtained off the entire retracted left bleacher area and locker room and made a new entrance tunnel halfway down that wall. They set up a new set of bleachers behind the section facing the hard camera to make it look like it was more packed than it was for the pay-per-view. It looked really nice and lent a new feel to the venue. One by one before the show, people noticed that disgruntled TNA wrestler Austin Aries was sitting in the bleachers just chilling and chatting in with local indie valet Aaron, I think. The previous night, there was some sort of angle with Aries trying to get in the ring, and before he was restrained. Clearly, something was planned for tonight. I didn't include this, but there was multiple live reports of people who apparently tried to talk to Aries before the show, and he was in full, yeah, I'm just here to be a fan character, working the kids, who bought it.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, it is. I will say this did not look great, and this was, to your point, yeah, you could see like more open seats on the bleacher. I don't know if moving that bleacher was a good idea, and in fact, that was, we'll get to some more quotes from Dave Meltzer throughout the show, but that was Dave's one big complaint for the show, and I'll go to the Observer, his review of the show. He wrote, quote, "If there is a negative to this show, the Frontier Fieldhouse for a show like this comes across too much like a high school gym, unlike the Manhattan Center, which translates into a better look. But it doesn't matter, because if you're looking for high production values or a nice-looking building, this promotion isn't going to be the one for you. If you like athletic action wrestling, they've got the niche." So, yeah, I will say the Manhattan Center was a great choice for the first show because it does have a good, unique look that does not look low rent. This looked like you would expect an indie show, just because the Frontier Fieldhouse, for those who haven't seen a show there, it looks like a giant empty warehouse.
Yeah, like, all these places are like either gyms or warehouses or, I mean, you know what to expect. Like, it's basically it. And they gussy it up with their lighting and their smoke and stuff, but there's only so much you can do.
Yeah, and another note I have on the show is I feel like it's interesting to note and remind people that anyone who wasn't there live in the building to watch this show, even though this show again was taped June 23rd, 2007, did not get a chance to see this show until late December, because that's when the pay-per-view debuted on some markets.
Wait, late December?
I mean, not December, September.
Okay.
September.
I was like,
September.
What? Okay.
Yeah, September. Thank you for catching. I didn't even notice that I did that. No, but I believe it was on some carriers, it was the 21st, and later for others. Meltzer said one in an Observer, quote, the second ROH pay-per-view won't be airing on In Demand, the primary character where most of the buys appear to have come from, until September 28th, nearly a month after what was thought would be the debut. So, yeah, I don't know why the pay-per-view debuted on the first ROH pay-per-view debuted on July 1st on some carriers, and then like a few days later or mid-July at latest on other carriers. And it was supposed to be pay-per-views every 2 months. I don't know why it didn't debut anywhere till late September, the second pay-per-view. So, but as a result, we get this weird thing where ROH on this night was taping the second pay-per-view. The first pay-per-view hadn't ever even debuted yet, and this second pay-per-view isn't going to air for another 3 months anywhere.
If you weren't clear on why this pay-per-view experiment didn't work, there's your explanation right there. Like, imagine if these shows were able to get on the air 1 to 2 weeks after they were taped. It probably would be different. That makes a difference. It makes it much less hard to book, makes it much less hard to promote it, makes it much more relevant when it finally does come out. I mean, everyone here who listens to this is a wrestling fan. They understand the value of watching something that's recent and current as far as being excited about it, right? That's why wrestling shows tend to air live even when they don't have to, because there's a premium on that. And when you're talking about literally 3 months delayed, that just doesn't fly. It didn't fly in the 80s. It didn't fly when WCW tried to do it in the 90s. Didn't fly in the 2000s. It's just too hard to get as into something as you could when it airs that much later. The diehard Ring of Honor fans were used to watching things 6 to 8 weeks later on tape, but if you're trying to grow the audience, that's not going to happen. And this is even worse than that. This is 3 months, not even 2.
Yeah, I feel like it feels like at different times in my history following wrestling, there's some times where people go, oh, live versus tape definitely makes a difference. Other people saying, other times, oh, if you look at these numbers in this era, live versus tape doesn't make much of a difference. But I think one thing is you lose any momentum from live buzz, right? The buzz coming out of a show like this, oh, it's really exciting, you can't wait to see it. It's anyone that read that online buzz, they're going to forget about it when the show debuts on pay-per-view 3 months later. They're just
for sure.
So, yeah. But we didn't have obviously news between the last show. News, not news between the. I'm off. Whoa, I am off. This is what happens when we do a rare Thursday night recording, Matt. I kept thinking today was Saturday or Sunday because that's how used to it I am. But we don't have news, obviously, because we always cover what happened in the timeline, and we just covered a show that took place literally the day before this show. But we do have an interesting kind of topic to talk about a little bit, which was this was an email I should have read on the last episode, but I did not read it in time, from a super listener of Through the Years. He has written in before, Michael Laney, and I'll just read what he read here. And this was about the last show that happened the night before this one, United We Stand. He wrote, "It's been a while since I've sent any notes. I was in attendance at the United We Stand show and just wanted to send one quick note ahead of your episode. One thing I found interesting with the show, and I don't believe it's really documented anywhere, is that to my knowledge, this show was the beginning of the viral marketing for the Age of the Fall angle. It was so subtle at the time that it didn't click until months later that it was part of an angle, but in the men's restroom, there was a message written in red in the mirror that just said, quote, 'Nothing saves.' Nothing came about it on the show, so I just assumed at the time that this was graffiti from some other event hosted at the venue.
I'm impressed that he even remembers a random piece of graffiti that he didn't think anything of in the moment. That's impressive.
Yeah, and he ends by saying, 'I think you're not too far away from the Project 161 message board postings and t-shirts being handed out to random people online. But I thought it was an interesting note that there was some subtle progression on this angle on the Dayton show.' So yeah, so for those who don't know, who are kind of following, Ring of Honor with us, younger listeners, and we do have some, Project 161 was this viral marketing angle that Gabe had the idea for, or that, although that is disputed, we'll get to that in just a second. And it was all building up to the debut of the Age of the Fall stable. And yeah, they would start, apparently, I didn't realize this, and Michael is right when he writes that, like, he doesn't believe this report anywhere else, because when I was looking up notes and, live reports for United We Stand, no one was saying, I saw weird graffiti in the bathroom, maybe this is a thing, because why would you think that, except in retrospect? But it would start with stuff like this, where nothing saved, and then eventually it would get into people writing weird message board posts and anonymous AOL Instant Messenger accounts and a million other things that I'm sure we'll get into over the next few months Through the Years. But I guess technically this weekend was the start of it. And I don't know if I ever realized this, or I should have. Project 161, Matt, doing this show has made it crystal clear. Project 161 is referring to the fact that the show Age of the Fall debuts on is the 161st show Ring of Honor will run. So
I bet we knew that at the time. Probably. And just forgot, because I think people would have mentioned that probably.
So even though we'll talk more about Project 161 and abusesociety.com and all that stuff probably in the coming months, I did want, just because this is the first time we talk about, I wanted to bring this up because I thought it was interesting. Maybe this was the good place to put it. And this is from an Observer story. We're leaping ahead all the way to October 2007, because the interesting thing, WWE had a piece of viral marketing that happened a little bit after this started about, of course, the return for Chris Jericho, the code breaker era of Chris Jericho. And Dave wrote this about that promotion, writing, quote, "On the viral campaign promotion, there are various," he's talking about the Chris Jericho one, "there are various versions now of the story as to what happened, particularly due to the similarity in time frame for the ROH Age of the Fall angle in an attempt to use the internet. The whole idea came from a promotional campaign used by 9 Inch Nails earlier this year to use the internet and clues to promote the release of the Year Zero album in April. As far as wrestling goes, we can trace the idea back to May. One version is that Gabe Sapolsky came up with the idea in May from the 9 Inch Nails campaign, and that Mr. Saint Laurent, who was working with ROH in Florida on producing the DVD, and Trevor some Ring of Honor people might know him. Everyone these days knows him better as Mr. Saint Laurent in MLW, but you might know him better as Jared David, as the brief announcer in 2006 ROH. But anyway, Mr. Saint Laurent heard about the idea. Saint Laurent is good friends with both Court Bauer and Teddy Hart, which also explains how the idea was at one point suggested to the New Hart Foundation. Bauer, who was on the WWE writing staff, brought the concept to Stephanie McMahon in June for the Hart Foundation. Bauer was familiar with them as he used Teddy Hart, TJ Wilson, and Harry Smith in his Major League Wrestling promotion. or Jericho. At the time, WWE felt they had a deal for Jericho to return later in the year. The other version of the story is it was St. Laurent's idea at first that pro wrestling should use that type of internet marketing to hype somebody new, and told the idea to both Sapolsky and to Bauer, who both liked it, and explained why both promotions were working on the same type of idea at the same time, because WWE wouldn't ever knowingly allow it to appear that they were copying an ROH created concept. So yeah, there is some dispute, I guess, of who created this idea. Gabe's version is that he was at a Nine Inch Nails concert, and yeah, as Dave wrote, Nine Inch Nails had an album years ago where they did a lot, and this was the era, probably the tail end of this era, where the idea of like viral marketing, where it's like, it's not just on the internet, it's like invading the shows, man. Like there's real little bit, this idea where I guess Year Zero had this storyline that you could follow, and there was different things in like the real world that was advancing the story, you know, things the fans could look for. And so that Gabe's story is he saw that and thought, hey, we should do like a wrestling version of that where the angle is not just what you see on the DVD, but it's like flyers are on the seats and, you know, graffiti's on the walls and things are happening on the message board and it's bleeding through into more quote unquote reality. And, you know, again, I have no idea who created this, but I would say if Gabe wanted to steal credit, I don't know if he would credit Nine Inch Nails so openly then. Like, if you're going to steal credit all the way. Just say, oh yeah, I can't with this idea myself. But, yeah, I don't know when you remember when Project 161 started, Matt, but yeah, I think you're on the same page with me, is you did not remember it starting this early.
Yeah, I remember it. Feels like more like an August kind of thing, but you know, it's been so long, and I don't know how much attention I was totally paying at that point because I was so disillusioned by the Benoit, murders and stuff that
what now?
Yeah. that I
we'll get to it.
Yeah, that I was, I don't know, I was sort of in a fog when it came to wrestling during that summer.
Yeah, we will have reason to talk about that later. We'll get to the show right now, but first, Matt, there's a dark match, and even the dark match on this show has an interesting note attached to it. So there was one dark match for the show. It was Alex Payne and Ernie Osiris defeating Dingo and Mitch Franklin in your classic ROH students plus Dingo pre-show match. And Chris Vetter from the PW ThROH live report has some interesting notes on this one. So this is his live report. He wrote, the dark match main event, he says that in quotes because this is apparently what it was billed at, started at about 7:20 p.m. and everyone laughed at the silliness of the only match being the main event. So yeah, apparently this was billed as the dark match main event. There was no other dark match on the show. And Chris continues, Alex Sugarfoot Payne and Ernie, he says Eddie Osiris, but it was Ernie, defeated Dingo and Mitch Franklin at 4:32. Chris continues, at the bell, the announcer said that 5 minutes had elapsed in the match, as if the cameras were joining it mid-match. Weird. I have no idea why they would do that. Because this match does not show up anywhere on video. Why you would start the match acting like you were 5 minutes into it, a student match, I have no clue. But apparently that is something that happened. And then we opened the show. We opened the second ROH pay-per-view ever, just like the first, with the sounds of a screaming crowd chanting ROH as we see the ROH logo and a graphic that says, in association with G-Funk Sports and Entertainment. And then we cut to Dave Prazak in the middle of the ring in front of the screaming fans at the Frontier Fieldhouse in Chicago, welcoming us to Ring of Honor. A moving, like, laser-projected ROH logo is even on one of the building's walls. They've really gone all out, Matt, by making any effort. Dave tells us that tonight we'll see why ROH is driven to present their brand of professional wrestling to us, and why the athletes of Ring of Honor are driven. At which point, Eric Stevens, Matt Cross, and Delirious walk to the ring, with Stevens grabbing the mic to challenge the No Remorse Corps to an impromptu 6-man tag right now. Delirious grabs the mic and he cuts a promo in Delirious Ease, which gets the already super loud crowd to go crazy. And then we cut to a special opening video for the pay-per-view showing highlights from the first pay-per-view, Respect is Earned, that are all related to ongoing feuds that are happening, also carrying over onto this pay-per-view, all while the song Dimension by WOLFMOTHER plays. Boy, first off, does that date the show for me? That is a very 2006 thing.
Yeah.
And I remember WOLFMOTHER, the band that was famous for half a second in this era for ripping off Led Zeppelin. And I know Led Zeppelin ripped off a lot of music themselves. And I'm just gonna say this, man. Like, look, I'm not even hating on WOLFMOTHER here, but I'm just going to say that we know having licensed music on pay-per-view costs Ring of Honor money. It's why we don't hear most of the wrestlers' usual themes on these early pay-per-views. It's why ROH allegedly shelled out $50,000 to get the rights to Give Me Back My Bullets from Leonard Skinner for the Briscoes for these pay-per-views. So I don't know what ROH paid for WOLFMOTHER to be the official theme song of this pay-per-view, but it's probably something. And I'd argue if it was over $500, it wasn't worth it for a promotion. And again, I'm just saying it wasn't worth it for a promotion that, according to Kerry Silkin, the guy who owned it, it was a money-losing promotion at this time that he really needed to start seeing some business increases from. Like, I can make an argument that having a licensed song makes your promotion look major league, but is one more fan buying like the next ROH pay-per-view in the future because Dimension by WOLFMOTHER played to start the show? Like, if ROH was a promotion on a bigger scale with a bigger budget in a better financial situation, I'm not even talking about this. But we're talking about a promotion that is on shaky enough ground that they're, like, at this point, a little over a year away from firing their booker and 2 years away from Kerry being about to shut down the entire promotion if Sinclair Broadcasting doesn't come in. And we're buying WOLFMOTHER, Matt. WOLFMOTHER.
See, I don't know if I agree with you on this one. First of all, I don't think WOLFMOTHER's that bad. First of all,
also the single was like a year old at this point.
A year's not that old. How many songs have you heard that came out last year, Trevor?
Yeah, but it's WOLFMOTHER. I just gotta say, Matt, it's WOLFMOTHER.
I still don't know what that means. I'm not like a WOLFMOTHER fan, but I think they seem fine. I don't know. It doesn't seem like they're like an embarrassing band to put out there.
No, I mean, they're still going, apparently. WOLFMOTHER going strong.
But like, okay, so here's why I disagree with you. It's just, you had to show that you're putting in some kind of effort. Even if this exact decision isn't going to change anything, the fact that they made it, like, you know what I mean? Like you have to put an extra foot forward, even if that means spending more money than you need to. And also, I think just given the kind of music that would play at the beginning of ROH, like live shows and stuff, this seems like just the kind of music that Carrie likes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And maybe she's like, I like this song. I'm going to shell out money for it. I want our pay-per-view to seem a little more major league. We'll have a real song, a real rock song in the intro. ECW used to do it. Although on their pay-per-views, they didn't, actually. They had that, that same ECW, I can't even do it. But you know what I'm talking about. Not Thunderkiss 69. So, I don't know. I don't think it's a big deal. I don't think it's a bad decision. I don't think it led to ROH going down the tubes or certainly didn't lead to them selling 1 second sooner than they would have otherwise. So I think it's fine. And also, like, I kind of like the song. Listening to it, I thought it was cool.
It's not a terrible song. I think it's the reason that's the song that I think that's a lot of people. If you ask them, do they know WOLFMOTHER? If they know one song, it's probably this song. And also, I guess in WOLFMOTHER, ROH WOLFMOTHER's defense, I just like saying WOLFMOTHER, but they do try and get their money's worth on this because we'll get to it later. I think they use it like 2 more times during the show. Like anytime they can put a random piece of music in this show, it's going to be WOLFMOTHER. Like I'm surprised they just didn't make it the theme for every wrestler.
Yeah.
For this episode.
Now I know WWE obviously for many years has always like had a theme, like a current musical theme song to their show. Sometimes not even current. Sometimes they would do old songs, and they would advertise the song like on the show. And actually, maybe you know this better than me. Does WWE ever pay for those songs, or do the record companies pay them to promote the songs?
I'm not sure, but I have to imagine at this point it's probably WWE getting paid because they are so. Yeah. Like WWE is never, I mean, they've always been obviously a big corporate capitalist promotion, but like, I don't think ever in my lifetime have they been more about like, if we're doing a pay-per-view in your city, we want a rights fee or stuff. Like, I can't imagine them giving away promotion of a band unless they're getting some money out of it at this point.
Yeah, but I wonder
like maybe 20 years ago, Vince would be like, oh, this band endorsing our show gives us credibility. Maybe we pay a little. I think that if that was ever the case, that has to have reversed.
Yeah, I wonder what it was like in 2007, though. Because you're right, like, obviously WWE now is just like a content creator. They don't even have any, like, they don't seem to even have any opinion about what wrestling is, but they, But like back then, it might have been the same thing. I don't know. But point is, if WWE ever paid for music, I think that very rare were the moments where that music enhanced their pay-per-view buys. I can think of a few where they likely did. Highway to Hell, I think that helped sell some
Yeah.
pay-per-views. I'm just saying, I don't think it's that big of a deal if you can't find a one-to-one correlation between using the song and getting more people to buy the shows.
And also, I will get this with the next pay-per-view, Man Up. But again, ROH trying to get their money's worth. The official theme of Man Up is "Give Me Back My Bullets" by Leonard Skinner. So like, if we're buying this goddamn song for 50 grand, we are going to make it not just the Briscoes theme, but we're going to just have it be the theme song for an entire pay-per-view. Which, you're going to use that for a pay-per-view, Man Up is the show to do it. But we then cut back to the show where the No Remorse Corps is running to the ring without entrances as Gabe continues to find ways like this impromptu match challenge to avoid having to play licensed themes on the pay-per-views. And the match that is beginning, of course, is the No Remorse Corps of Davey Richards, Rocky Romero, and Roderick Strong defeated Delirious and the Resilience of Eric Stevens and Matt Cross in 11 minutes, 23 seconds when Richards pinned Cross after he hit a DR driver. Matt, what did you think about this? This was our pay-per-view opener.
Well, this crowd was electric, really for almost the entire show. But like that really helped the fact that this match just seemed like nonstop excitement. There have been ups and downs in the Resilience versus No Remorse Corps feud in terms of just like how exciting the matches were. This match was all excitement, just like all big moves, and the crowd was reacting big to all of it. Got started fast, kept up the pace pretty much the whole time. Lots of cool double team stuff by both of the teams. Matt Cross, I think, just played to his strengths because sometimes he's a kind of, I don't want to say a weak link, but he hasn't really seemed to gel in this promotion. And in this match, he just got to do everything that he does well. It was basically just like a faster version of what we've seen before. A lot of power stuff by Stevens. They eventually do one heat sequence where the No Remorse Corps is working over Delirious. And also, I feel like the audio was really popping for whatever. Like, don't the chops and the kick sound extra loud here? Like, I don't know what they were able to do to make that happen. I don't know if that's something they did in post-production or they just got lucky. But just everything sounded really good. There was a spot where Delirious hit Richard in the stomach with a headbutt, and then as Richard came off the middle ropes, and then Richards tags in Strong, but Delirious crawls through Strong's legs and tags Stevens, who did like a really good House of Fire hot tag. And we get a cool sequence in the corner where Stevens hits the choo-choo, right followed by a handspring by Matt Cross, right followed by a panic attack by Delirious. And then Cross hits the space-flying tiger drop pretty suddenly. Like, there we get a spot where just we get a pop-up power slam by Stevens on Strong. Then Richards hits Stevens with the missile drop kick. Then Delirious comes in and, Richards comes in and does a DR driver on Delirious, or goes for a DR driver on Delirious, but Cross hits him with a reverse Rana. And just like everyone is knocked down, gets a big pop, and we get a close-up of Richards on the ground going, "Where am I?" Like he just like says that literally. So it's just a lot more of that. Just a lot of, we get like a nice little strike battle between Stevens and Richards, which ends with some suplexes. We get a spot where Stevens hits a release German on Richards, and then Delirious hits Shadows Over Hell on Richards, and then Cross hits him with the shooting star press, and Romero breaks up the pin, and we get the first ROH chant of the night, not counting the very beginning of the show. There's just a lot of cool stuff, and it's sad that the Resilience lost again, and like, if you're into selling, this isn't the match for you, but I don't know how you could have put a better foot forward, like, compared to the other promotions out there as far as hot crowd, hard hitting, nonstop action. I don't know how you complain about this. Like, it's just like a really, really fun, hot, all action match. And I feel like just a great way to start the pay-per-view.
Yeah, we had recently seen these two teams wrestle each other, but to me, this felt like the pay-per-view version. And oftentimes, when you say pay-per-view version or big match version of a match, that means longer. This was shorter. Like some of this felt like the wrestling equivalent of playing a podcast at 1.25 speed, which is a sick habit that only twisted individuals like Joe Gagney employ. But they go through I would say that like they go through the stages of a match like this that they'd normally go through, like Delirious having a face in peril sequence, but they run through them quicker, almost in the way like this match feels edited, like not literally edited in post-production, but as if they went, okay, we're opening a pay-per-view. We can't lose the people for a second. All killer, no filler. Like a lot of this match almost feels like a scramble. They have the dive train in the opening minutes. Even the face in peril beatdown is fast paced. And when we get to the hot tag, from there on, it's nothing but big spots. I would say this was the kind of match I think I saw in the last episode that the Brazilians could have used more of at this point in their run, which is just do everything you know how to do that is cool. Every single cool move you know how to do, just try and get noticed. And that's kind of what this match was. And in terms of like, is there much connective tissue here or subtlety or nuance or character work? No, but like for the purposes of having a hot start to a show for what you are hoping is a new audience, whether or not that actually was the reality, I feel like this is the right kind of match. It worked. And I agree with you in particular. Like I thought Matt Cross, this was one of the better matches. One of the better performances he's had so far, where just the amount he was in, he came off really good. I thought he got a couple great near falls late that the crowd bought into and was totally into. He took that great looking vertical spike bump for a Rocky Romero DDT. Like, overall, I would give this a super strong good, like the highest 3.5 stars I can give, because I think it was quite a bit of fun. But at the same time, it was also the style of match that I won't remember in a month because I've seen so many matches like this. But it was really fun for what it was. And I think the right choice to have it in this slot to open the pay-per-view. And so, Matt, we got a special treat here because we did a little bit on the last pay-per-view. But because it was a pay-per-view, all the newsletters covered it. And usually, a lot of times, the newsletters had very spotty at best official review coverage of these pay-per-views. And so we're going to do, maybe for the first time, I'm not sure. My memory's terrible. We are going to have, after every match, reviews from Dave Meltzer, Wade Keller, and Brian Alvarez, all with star ratings. It is clearly, we're going to do the Coke, Pepsi, and I guess, RC Cola challenge here. And, yeah, we're going to get to compare.
I just got the RC Cola.
and we're going to, yeah, and so when I read, I'm going to give the star ratings and their little excerpts. These aren't their full reviews, but I just pulled out anything that was moves because Matt already, any moves that are interesting, Matt and I already talk about. But anything that they said that was actually an opinion about the match, and they're going to be short, little things, but we're going to add them to each match for this pay-per-view because it's neat. Anyway, okay, Dave Meltzer's review. This was a super fast-paced match filled with spectacular moves. It was basically what the TNA X division should be, came close to being at one point, but somehow stumbled out of. Cross, a short former gymnast who uses that background to pull some amazing things off, was a standout. You wouldn't want a whole show of matches like this, but it was a perfect way to make the show feel special and different. 3.75 stars. Wade Keller goes, lots of exciting big spots with great intensity throughout. The crowd also elevated the matches. They were passionately into everything. 2.75 stars. Brian Alvarez didn't have really any interesting opinions about this match, but he gave this match a flat 4 stars. So,
but do you see what I mean about Wade Keller having weird write-ups? Like, okay, like I get that there are some people that are strict with star ratings, but that write-up did not seem like a 2.75 star write-up, right?
Yeah,
like
exactly.
It seemed like one of those things where like people joke, like this was the best match I ever saw, 2.5 stars, like something like that. Like, I don't know. I feel like it's just like to me, if you're saying something that good about a match and you're saying it's 2.75 stars, like you should probably be saying like why it wasn't higher, Yeah.
Well, that's one of the arts of writing a review, not of just wrestling, of anything, which is generally when I read a review, if it's well written, you should be able, by the end of the written review, if you didn't know what the score was, be able to guess within, a certain little bit of wiggle room what the score is. And yeah, to your point, if I read that review, I would have guessed, he's going to rate it probably around what Dave and Brian did. And to give it not even 3 stars, well, it's like, yeah, like you didn't list one flaw.
It's fine. Like, it's fine. You could say like you could have high standards, but like explain,
yeah, exactly.
So in that case, yeah, it's a badly written review because it doesn't make sense.
And so immediately after the match, the No Remorse Corps continue attacking Matt Cross as the crowd chants for Austin Aries, who Dave Prazak had said on commentary during the match was in the crowd tonight. In fact, Dave gave the same spiel he gave the night before, which is Aries isn't allowed to be in ROH to lead the Resilience anymore because of his contractual obligations to another wrestling organization. And I think on the last show, Matt, you asked, like, did Dave say TNA or just say something generic? And I could have sworn I thought he said TNA on the last show. It's interesting, on the pay-per-view, he does not say TNA. For sure. He says another wrestling organization. So they go out of their way to not say it on the pay-per-view.
Yeah.
But Dave continues and to saying, oh, but Aries bought a ticket tonight because he just wants to see the great show. And so Aries does run into the ring from the crowd to a huge pop. He takes out Romero and Richards 1-on-2 as commentary goes into full "he doesn't work here" mode, with Lenny Leonard literally saying he can't do this. and Prazak adds, this isn't going to make air anyway. And so Aries, after he takes them out, he calls for Roddy to get back in the ring, and Roddy jumps on the apron but then as soon as, he jumps on the apron and Aries gets distracted, Roddy runs back to the aisle, and that distraction is enough to let the rest of the No Remorse Corps escape to the aisle with him, except Aries then, as they are leaving at ringside, he takes them out with his heat-seeking missile tope. One of his shoes comes off in the process, which was funny to see, and he then picks up the shoe and chases Roddy with it for a short little bit, so that was funny. And then Aries gets back in the ring and he grabs the mic, and the crowd is just going crazy. And Matt, like you said, this crowd was amazing pretty much the whole night. And here, this might be their loudest. They are going bug fuck nuts for Austin Aries. And Aries says he's sitting at home for too long. He's been sitting at home for 2 long months, watching a lot of BS going on around here. He says he has a little surprise, and he pulls out a piece of paper from his pocket, which he says once he signs it, gives him his wrestling freedom. He says he's going to hunt down the No Remorse Corps and beat some respect into them. This piece of paper, once he signs it, will make him the property of the greatest professional wrestling company in the world, Ring of Honor. He asked the fans to throw him a pen. And if you're wondering how many indie wrestling fans would bring a pen to the show, the answer seems to be at least somewhere between 5 and 10. I can't remember a time in life where I've brought a pen with me unless I knew ahead of time I needed to bring a pen with me. But, pens are handy. Aries signs the contract as fans chant, "Welcome back." Aries says he is officially back home in ROH, proud to be where he belongs, in a company that respects the fans, the wrestlers, and this business. We get a loud "fuck TNA" chant, but Aries quickly tells the fans, I'm not done yet. He guarantees us that we will not find more action, more excitement, and more passion anywhere else in this industry, because they are exactly what they say they are. They are ROH. He is Austin Aries, and we are wrestling. Aries hands the contract to ROH owner Kerry Silkin, who, as usual, is sitting at ringside, as the crowd launches into another huge welcome back chant to end the segment. I thought this was a really good segment for ROH. They, at this point in time, they had suffered a lot of recent optics losses with guys jumping to TNA and WWE. And look, that was always going to be unavoidable. That is part of ROH's DNA by nature of the scale they ran. They were never going to be most wrestlers' final destination or end goal, and they knew that going in, everyone involved. But I still think it was nice, right as they were starting pay-per-view, to get one name that said, hey, I'm choosing ROH over TNA, actually. Now, scratching beneath the surface, how much of that is the fact that Aries was on the outs with TNA at this point and wasn't exactly in line for a huge push with them at this moment? Who knows? But
so you're saying that he was the 2007 version of Andrade?
Exactly. I mean, I don't know if it was that far, but
no. People were really, really, really excited for Aries to come back.
Yeah, and but to me, it looked good. The crowd went absolutely bananas for Aries this entire segment, which made him look like the biggest star in the world for this one night, at least.
And his promo, I think, was kind of like one of the best promos. Like, the crowd really fueled him. He was on fire in this promo. So loud, so passionate. I actually wrote down, wow, was he passionate? And I think the crowd obviously helped him get there, because they were just out of their minds. But all of it made it seem like such an intense and really important moment,
Yeah, and it was such a rah kind of face of the company promo, which again I think is good to have when you're starting out on pay-per-view like this. I personally though, on one hand, I will say this: I do feel like Aries already had a great full run in ROH and had exhausted a lot of his major matches and title changes to the point where I wouldn't have been at this point, oh boy, more Aries. I think you've talked about Matt. You said Pat. I'm mixing up everything, but Matt. I think you've made a great point at different times in the history of the show, talking about how sometimes when guys left, it was actually a net benefit to ROH, even when like some of the news people would be like, oh, this is bad for our ROH because it forced them to freshen up. I feel like I kind of almost had that feeling with Aries, but then on the other hand, from ROH's standpoint, he's a very talented guy who is very over with their fans that they're able to add back to the roster during a period where they just had a big exodus of similar longtime fixtures to other promotions, whether it was Cabana going to WWE or all the guys getting pulled by TNA. So I was like, if I remember at the time, I wasn't like, oh man, Austin Aries dream matches as much. I was like, oh, this is just good for the company.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, and just in hindsight, he did a lot of great stuff on this second run. Like, a lot of Aries' best stuff happens over the next like year or two. So I think just with the benefit of hindsight, it ended up being pretty good for ROH and for Aries.
Yeah, it worked out really well. And do you have any more thoughts on the segment or?
No, I thought it was killer.
Okay.
Like I thought it was. It was really, really great.
Yeah. And next we joined the Briscoes backstage. Jay says they've come a long way from Sandy Fork, Delaware to the first ROH shows in Japan. Mark says they want the best tag team Japan's got, man up. And then they start shoving each other, and we cut to clips from ROH's double shot of Japan, which actually hadn't happened at the time that
I know this is like the weird like timeline stuff. It happens like after this, but they show it here. But then on the extra DVD bonus material, they're like, oh, we're setting up for that show that hasn't happened yet. It's so confusing. I felt so bad for Gabe Sapolsky watching this.
Yeah, because technically the two shows in ROH in Japan are the next two shows they ran after this show, but clearly, obviously, because the pay-per-view didn't air till late September, they had plenty of time to edit footage of these Japan shows into this segment here. Dimension by WOLFMOTHER plays again because RH is going to get their money's worth.
That's a good. It's a good song. That's what I say.
As we get voiceover from Bryan Danielson and Nigel McGuinness talking about the importance of Japan, we even get a clip of the merch table they had at one of the Japan shows, and we end the whole highlight. They show a bunch of highlights from these Japan shows, and it ends with this montage. Ends with a shot of some Japanese fans chanting ROH in a parking lot at one of the shows, and a Japanese-styled ROH logo. This was a pretty extensive video package, and it's interesting to see them push this so heavy to their new pay-per-view audience because I imagine it's make ROH seem a bigger deal. Like, oh, ROH is such a big company, we can run around the world. I know Meltzer mentioned during his review of the first ROH pay-per-view that he thought they were going on commentary, going out of their way to mention all their connections to other countries in part to make themselves seem like a big deal, which I could see this being that for the same reason and to get that kind of credibility. And probably this other reason, obviously, was you're selling a DVD on the pay-per-view, and DVDs were where ROH's real money was made at this point. Although this video package didn't actually tell you that these shows were going to be DVDs and not the next pay-per-view, and they didn't tell you where to get the DVDs. So, although they would have a plug for the website, I think later. So
yeah, I think they felt that was sufficient, having the plug for the website.
Yeah. Yeah. But like if I was just watching as a fan, I might just assume if I was a casual fan, oh, the next pay-per-view is going to be them in Japan, which it isn't. Those shows aren't pay-per-view. But interesting thing they did here. And like you said, Matt, also kind of mind-bending. There's going to be another thing later too, where we get into some very weird, like, this is like the first pay-per-view wasn't that bad, but this pay-per-view is where we really get like the weird staggered time distortion problems start to creep in. So that brings us to the second match. Claudio Castagnoli defeated Matt Sydal via pinfall in 8 minutes, 18 seconds with a roll through of Arana. We go to this match right at the start of Bobby Cruz's in-ring introductions, which he usually doesn't do for non-title matches, but obviously here, since they knew they were going to cut out the licensed music they couldn't use for this match, I guess they figured, well, let's do the introductions right in the ring as kind of a start point for the pay-per-view. Claudio gets the entire crowd to do the wave with Hayes. And so, Prazak on commentary on this match, he says, the story of this match is Sydal blamed Claudio for their tag title shot loss and asked for this match. And I want to point something out that I frequently praise Gabe Sapolsky for, that I think was one of his strong suits, and that's show-to-show booking when you're running the same city, or in this case, show-to-show booking just on the pay-per-views. Because if you watch every ROH show, every DVD, the idea that Seidel blames Claudio for a tag title loss makes sense, because literally the show they ran the night before was the DVD exclusive United We Stand, where they lost 2-0 to the Briscoes. But if you only watch the pay-per-views, the angle makes just as much sense, because on the last pay-per-view, Seidel and Claudio challenged the Briscoes in a different tag title match. So there's going to be a couple of moments where this happens, where Gabe does stuff where it doesn't matter if you just watch the pay-per-views or you watch everything. The story makes just the sense. Like, you could say, even at the end of this pay-per-view, you could say, oh, Bryan Danielson's the number one contender. I can't wait to watch him take on Morishima on the next pay-per-view. And he does, but that's not the first Danielson Morishima match. The DVD audience gets that. So, like, he's doing some neat things here where even like he's kind of working at least in these first few pay-per-views, where even if you just watch the pay-per-views, you're going to be fine. The stories are going to make sense. They're kind of going to flow. But if you watch the DVDs too, you get extra beats. So yeah. But yeah, I thought this whole pay-per-view was good in that sense. If you look at this pay-per-view, everything was kind of built from the first pay-per-view. Like, the Danielson Nigel main event was kind of set up with the Respect Is Earned tagged main event. Briscoes and Steen versus Steen Generico was set with the big angle they did with the big brawl at Respect Is Earned. Delirious continues his feud with Roddy from the last pay-per-view here in that opening tag. And even Whitmer and Marufuji is like a match between two people we saw at least featured on the first pay-per-view. So anyway, this match. This is another match that felt to me like it was worked with this being a 2-hour pay-per-view in mind. We only get 8 minutes. I'm sure if this was a DVD, we probably would have gotten it like at least another 2 to 4 minutes. It's another very fast-paced match that is about doing cool stuff, keeping you popping, not much else. Claudio, I felt, was just zipping around the ring here, so light on his feet for a guy his size. Look, there's a spot in this match where Claudio's charging Seidel. Seidel dodges, and Claudio just flies through the ring to the floor, through the bottom and middle ropes, feet first. And I thought, man, you are just nimble as hell for a guy that tall. And Seidel gets a good 3 or 4 great looking moves here that involve using Claudio being just an amazing base, doing big Rana or arm drag variations as he flies all around Claudio's shoulders. He also does his classic stand on my opponent's shoulder spot, although unfortunately on this like big stage of pay-per-view, he's only able to stand this time for, I would say, like a half a second before he has to drop back down. And then the finish of this match is just Claudio rolling through a Seidel Rana for the pin. But it's maybe one of the best versions of that I've ever seen, because normally when you see like roll through a Rana to a pin, it's just like a light roll into the pin after the Rana hits. But here it felt like they started to do the roll in midair.
They did all of it in midair.
Yeah, and it happened with such speed and momentum. It came off less like a roll through and more like halfway between a roll through and like a midair code red. It looked absolutely great. I would have loved to see these guys in another 5 minutes, but I'd call it real good for the 8 minutes we got. Like, this was a very fun to me. Like, and I'm only giving star ratings for this show because I want to compare them to the RC and Coke and Pepsi. But I would give this, like, it's a real fun 3.25 star match.
I think this match benefited from being shorter, honestly, because they just did, like, it was just nonstop go, go, go. And, like, yeah, that is what you want to see here. Like, and I would say, like, I would describe this as having, like, what I would call immaculate athleticism. Like, on a level that you really rarely see, like, in terms of just how on point they were. Like, what I was comparing it to at certain points almost was, like, those early, like, Ricochet against Ospreay matches. Like, maybe not quite to that level, but, like, for 2007 ROH, pretty darn close. Like, they were just so precise with what they were doing, and it was incredibly impressive. And I don't think it had to be any longer than that, because it wasn't a main event match. It was a 2-hour show. And it's like, this is, again, just like in that first match, it wasn't hard hitting like the first match, but it was all just about, like, we have great athletes and we let them do great athletic stuff. And so the match didn't feel like it didn't feel substantial, even though it was built out of, an issue. But whether it was or it wasn't, it would have been just as good. Like, it was just about the great athleticism. And I know you said, like, they cut out entrances to avoid the using the theme songs, but I actually like that they did that. I think it enhances things. It makes ROH feel like, okay, we're focused on wrestling. And so we're just going to have guys in the ring and they wrestle. I like that. So I really love this presentation. I probably like the match even like a little bit more than you, just because I don't know. I just thought it was a very beautifully executed match. Whether it was Claudio doing gut wrenching Seidel all the way off the ground, that spot where Claudio gracefully flew out of the ring to the floor under the middle rope, and then Seidel hit that dive immediately. Whether it was Seidel catching Claudio's bicycle kick and going for the dragon screw, the Seidel on the top rope and Claudio popping up, uppercutting, running enziguri, and the bicycle kick. And of course that finish seemed almost impossible. That's how good it was. I was just very impressed with, they tried to be on point for this pay-per-view match, and they were. They were almost flawless, and I thought it was a beautiful thing to watch.
I do like entrances because I think it makes the wrestlers seem like a bigger deal, and I do like just the flow of shows with entrances. But I can definitely see your point about it making the show even more dense with wrestling. And to your point, we'll get into this later, but when a lot of these guys sum up the reviews of the whole show, a lot of the media about this pay-per-view and maybe even a couple of the other early ROH pay-per-views was a lot of these guys just going, what a refreshing thing is to see a pay-per-view that is dense with wrestling. It feels like nowadays everyone complains oh, there's so much wrestling on this wrestling pay-per-view. And granted, that's partly because the shows are a lot longer.
You're talking about AEW specifically.
Yeah. But we're now at a point in this era in 2007, people are compared to that era of TNA and WWE, people were oh, finally a pay-per-view that's just about let's put a lot of really good wrestling on. Let's focus on that.
WWE, I think is right now is worse than ever about having shows where just so much time being sucked up by not matches, So I think it's still relevant. But yes, the density involves the show not being 5 hours long.
Yeah, it is the least dense WWE pay-per-views have ever been now, where it's half as much filler. It is when your mom makes meatloaf and you're between paychecks and half of the meatloaf is breadcrumbs. We just gotta stretch that's what it's half. There's that Twitter account that literally keeps track of how much of WWE's pay-per-views is wrestling and how much of it is everything else. And it is, I think, at times 50% or less. It's insane.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll go to the reviews, and I think there's a real interesting thing in this first review, Matt. So this is Dave Meltzer's review of this match. And we've got a new through the years theme at this point. I always love when we have little themes that emerge through the show. So see if you can spot it. Dave wrote, crowd was hot. Castagnoli opened with a giant swing. There were a few spots where Castagnoli's offense didn't look major league, but it picked up so much at the end that it was strong. Larry Sweeney is tremendous in his role. Remind me of a young Bobby Heenan in the 70s AWA days. 3.25 stars. Matt, this has to be the second or third time that Dave has negged Claudio's wrestling, which I don't see what he is seeing here.
No. I don't see it at all. I couldn't for the life of me. We criticized Claudio a lot when he was a heel. We had plenty of negative to say about Claudio, but in this recent run, no, his offense, no, he had great offense, really good offense, above average offense. Because didn't
Dave, during when Claudio was briefly going to get signed by WWE in 2006 to do something where, I don't know why they would pick Claudio of all these guys and stuff like that, other than his height. He's had a couple moments like that. And yet, like you said, we were hard on Claudio in 2006, but we were hard on because we thought just as a heel singles in ROH, so with those qualifiers, he had a disappointing run. There's that match with Samoa Joe that's very disappointing. He just seemed to kind of slow things down in a way that did not play to his strengths. But even when we were, to what you're saying, even when we were criticizing him in that era, I don't think one of our complaints was ever that his offense didn't look major league.
No.
That is such a weird criticism of him. Yeah. But next we go to Wade Keller. who wrote, if you want to see two really good athletes exchanging really nice state-of-the-art third gear action, this was for you. It was also nice that they linked this to respect as earned, saying that Seidel blamed Claudio for their loss against the Briscoes and issued a challenge for a singles match. It's clear early on that Ring of Honor is about the in-ring action, not promos. One thing that always stands out in a positive way about ROH is that the announcers call moves by unique names. Not only are there a wide array of moves in the matches, but the announcers treat them seriously enough to call them by name. In WWE, and a policy sadly followed by TNA, naming too many moves is considered confusing to the audience or treating the in-ring action too seriously. Good believable near falls leading up to the finish. The finishing move shown in slow-mo was amazing. 3.25 stars.
Hey, that rating corresponded with the review.
Yeah. I will say Wade gets better at that throughout the rest of the reviews. But that first match was a weird outlier, I think. And then finally we go to Bryan Alvarez. They did Lucha early and it ruled. I seriously have no idea why Claudio doesn't give Mexico a try. He could be a huge star. This match appeared to be in double speed, and it was like a 15-minute match compressed into 7 minutes. Would have been even better with more time. 3.5 stars. Bryan Alvarez, he loved in this era to say that I think 1 in 5 matches was Lucha. It seemed like everything.
But Claudio did do well in Mexico at different points, didn't he?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think Brian's instinct on that, like he would be great in Mexico. Yeah, I think, again, talking about how he's a great base and for a guy his size can do great athleticism and he works really good with smaller flyers. Like he would have been, I mean, I'm sure he did. I know he did do some stuff in Mexico, but that's a guy where if he didn't have even bigger aspirations of North America, to me, that guy could have been a mainstay in like CMLL for 20 or more years. So yeah, absolutely. After the match, we get an instant replay of the finish from a second camera angle, which is the kind of thing I wish we got more on the regular DVDs because it's only the pay-per-view we've talked about before where Ring of Honor in these early years, they shot the shows with the hard cam and then 2 handheld cams, but they only ever used one handheld cam for the set. So it was only 2 camera shoots because I guess maybe they didn't want to go through the energy or time of editing in the third cam. They only had that for a backup in case something went wrong. And it feels like in the pay-per-views, the 2 pay-per-views they've had so far, they have gone out of their way for stuff like the replays to use every cam, which I wish we got more of. But Larry Sweeney then comes out with a mic, as well as Chris Hero, Tank Tolan, and Bobby Dempsey behind him. Larry says, the timing is everything, and the timing has come for super agent Larry Sweeney and Sweet and Sour Incorporated to make their move. They get in the ring, and Larry introduces Chris Hero as the #1 athlete in professional wrestling and the man that carried you, Claudio Castagnoli, to the World Tag Team Championships. Larry says he's always had an eye for greatness, and he tells Matt Sydal he can turn his recent losses into victories. He offers Matt a contract and says if he signs, he'll get first-class treatment all the way. Claudio grabs the mic and he tells Sydal not to do this, saying that Sweeney is a scumbag. We get a "you're a scumbag" chant way before MJF. Claudio says he's not going to let Sydal make a mistake, and he snatches away the contract. He says, this is what I think of Sweet and Sour Incorporated, and he tears the contract up. Tank Tolan at this point shoves Bobby Dempsey into Claudio. Claudio takes out Dempsey. Then he takes out Chris Hero. He goes after Sweeney when Matt Sydal attacks Claudio from behind to a chorus of boos. Hero lays in stomps to Claudio as Sweeney repeatedly calls Claudio a ham and egger, really justifying Dave Meltzer's comparison to Bobby Heenan. Hero hits the Hero's welcome on Claudio, and then he locks Claudio in the Hangman's Clutch submission as Tolan does push-ups in Claudio's face and Sweeney gloats. Sydal and Sweeney shake hands and hug, and the fans chant, "You sold out." Sweeney says they have some celebrating to do, and Sweet and Sour Incorporated leave. I thought this was a good, by-the-book, you've seen this a lot, standard pro wrestling angle that was really made by Sweeney's energy and charisma, I would say.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's pretty basic and fine. It was weird, though, they kind of dialed back Sydal's heelishness for these recent weeks right before he finally turned. Like, I was like, he was going to turn sooner, but then they held off and then they kind of forgot. Then they remembered again. I don't know what the deal was. I will say it is funny to see Prazak get so upset about Sydal joining the group because it's out of character for him. Like, Sydal's been acting like a dick for a while, so it's not like so shocking. And like, that's, I don't know, it's just not, other than like with the CZW stuff, it's just not like Prazak to be like, oh no, he's a bad guy. Like, it's just, that wasn't his personality. At least not in ROH.
Yeah, I wonder if that's continuing the trend we've kind of seen where it feels like on the pay-per-views, the announcers are a little more
Yes.
amped up and like hitting notes with a little less subtlety and a little harder,
Yes.
like,
They
oh,
dial
this
it
and
up a
oh,
lot.
that.
They dial it up a
Yeah.
lot on the pay-per-views, yeah.
And maybe why the Seidel thing that seemed like like you said, they quietly kind of abandoned the Seidel heel thing only to bring it back not too long later. Maybe that came up recently because we'll go to Dave Meltzer in the Observer who wrote, Ring of Honor are doing an angle in ROH where Larry Sweeney, who is the storyline agent for Matt Sydal, is deciding between four offers. It's a work and a shoot in that Sweeney isn't his real agent, but Sydal does have offers. Sydal has committed to ROH and Dragon Gate through the summer. He is probably the biggest name being used who hasn't signed an ROH deal and has had talks with WWE. If he does leave, they've set up Sweeney as the guy who would have negotiated his WWE contract, so Sweeney gets heat off of it. If he stays, they are still a heel act because they've made it clear he is talking about leaving. So, yeah, they are trying to use this whole thing as a reality because, yeah, I think Sydal, when I was doing research for this episode, there was even talk of him maybe having like a tryout match for TNA, which I don't know if it ever came to fruition, but Sydal at this point was clearly like, I'm going to play off all the sides against each other, get the best deal I can, and he chooses WWE in the end. So this seems to be ROH doing kind of we don't know for sure where he's going to end up, so let's create an angle where we will benefit regardless of where he ends up.
And a smart way to do it, I think, honestly.
Yeah. We then get a Jimmy Ray video package where we see highlights of him as Jimmy in voiceover tells us that he's been on more ROH shows than anyone on this roster in some of the biggest feuds with the likes of Nigel McGuinness, CM Punk, AJ Styles, and Generation X. It's time for him to take what is his, the ROH World title against Morishima tonight. And I thought Wade Keller made an interesting point where he wrote about this. The timing wasn't great to have Jimmy Rave having already returned to TNA before this pay-per-view aired with his ROH World title shot. And yeah, yet another weird quirk of having the pay-per-views delayed. Jimmy Rave leaves ROH 3 shows after this and already is in TNA before this pay-per-view airs. And this is not something ROH plans for it. We'll talk about when that show happens, but Jimmy gets mad about things and asks for his release the night of a show after his match is done. But yeah, it is almost a weird thing. Well, it is not almost. It's slightly weird where they're building up a Jimmy Rave thing and he's gone.
Yeah, but it works for this self-contained event.
Yeah, things happen. And then we go to Naomichi Marufuji defeated BJ Whitmer via pinfall in 10 minutes, 56 seconds after hitting the Shiranui. Matt, what did you think about this match?
Well, I still think it's fun that they have Kenta and Marufuji on these early Ring of Honor pay-per-views because obviously Kenta is not on this one. I feel like it was good to have a match at this point in the card that slowed things down. And obviously, this match did not have the same heat that the first couple matches had because there was no issue whatsoever that I could think of, unless you could think of something that I forgot about.
No.
But
I think it's literally, again, just the idea of you saw early on that pay-per-view Marufuji and you saw BJ Whitmer. So even if you just watch the pay-per-view, rather than like increasing the amount of roster people you see on the first 2 pay-per-views, let's just kind of get you to know this smaller grouping, I guess.
Yeah, and it was going to play into the angle with Whitmer later, but I'd say this match slowed things down a bit, and there was more psychologically sound, I would say, than the first 2 matches, which were just go go go. This was not go go go, and this wasn't like a psychologically complex match, but it had more peaks, it had more valleys, it had less pop to it. It had less heat to it. They do some early standoffs. They try to out-agility each other. And we actually get some pretty unusual camera shots here. I think they actually had like an extra camera, just like they did on the first pay-per-view, with like different like weird close-up angles. So it wasn't just the 2 handhelds and the hard camera. I think there was a fourth camera there. But it was pretty basic, except for like there was a spot where Marufuji hit Whitmer's head into the ring post. I thought that was a little aggressive for everything else in the match. But they go back in the ring and they trade some big moves. Marufuji goes up top. Whitmer hits a big superplex, which leaves them both down. They get back on their feet into a chop exchange. They do Whitmer does a suplex combo into the power bomb. Marufuji hits a pre-Jericho codebreaker, so maybe he was the one that was really going viral here. But there's a spot where Marufuji hits a pretty weak clothesline, but Whitmer stays up, and so I guess the weak clothesline was on purpose. And then they both clothesline each other, and Marufuji crosses him up and hits a better clothesline, gets a 2 count. Marufuji hits the coast-to-coast drop kick at one point and Whitmer kicks out of that. And then we get the spot where Marufuji hits a super kick, goes for the Shiranui. Whitmer blocks, goes for a suplex, but Marufuji lands on his feet, hits another super kick, hits the Shiranui for the win. Yeah, I would say this is one of the less memorable matches we've seen so far tonight. A pretty good match, I would say, like in terms of just solid work, but they didn't go balls out. It didn't feel like they were like, oh, we have to put our best foot forward here for a pay-per-view. It feels like this is the match they would have had on any show in any position, and didn't do anything new like you would see in the other 2 matches. So maybe you could argue a little disappointing, but I think still fine. That's how I would say. It was fine.
I maybe like this match. Well, I probably like the match the same as you. I maybe thought it was a little more fast-paced than maybe you thought it was, but I would say, first off, this match continues the BJ Whitmer losing streak gimmick, and again, this is another example of Gabe framing something so it works if you only watch the pay-per-views, because obviously, if you watched all the shows, including the DVDs, Whitmer's gimmick a losing streak is fairly long at this point. But on commentary, Prazak says Whitmer is 0-1 on pay-per-view, and Marufuji is 1-0 on pay-per-view. And ROH, you need to win if you want to stay on pay-per-view. So they've worked it again, where even if you don't watch the DVDs, they're still finding a new way to sell the BJ Whitmer losing streak. Whitmer also continues his "I'm frustrated with the refs" wrinkle to that gimmick here. Although during this match, it's very half-hearted, because rather than scream and shove the ref like he's done in the past, he just gives this very soft, emotionless, that was 3 after every cover he makes in this match, where it's like, so he knows he has to do it to further the angle, but he's just kind of not focused on it, so he's just like, 1, 2, that was 3. Okay, move on. But, I would say this was our 3rd straight match that was more just action without much else, but it probably suffered a little bit to me because of that, because while I thought this match was decently fast-paced and it had a good amount of action, it wasn't as fast or as fun or as breezy as the first 2 matches. With you saying this didn't have as much pop, I completely agree with. And I feel like the problem is when you're doing 3 matches in a row that are all, I think, trying to be like low on story and more just on fun and hit you quick on relatively short action-packed matches, it's hard not to compare all 3. And this was, to me, clearly the least entertaining of the 3 matches. The crowd is into Marufuji to the point where they start booing BJ's offense a little in the second half of this match, despite the fact that BJ really wasn't acting heelish during this match in a significant way. But for me, this match was like, it was the greatest hits of Marufuji, and it was Whitmer doing his usual generic hard effort performance. So not bad, but I felt like I had seen all these ingredients before, and they weren't mixing together in this match to become anything new. So I would give this a really strong above average, like 2 3/4 stars, although someone could talk me into it being maybe like a low good 3 stars if you had not seen these guys, everything these 2 had done in this match a lot of times before. So Wade Keller, that is how you do a 2 3/4 star review. That is
exactly. I was thinking the same thing. Good job.
I will give one nitpick in this match too, which is at one point Whitmer climbs the turnbuckles with his back to the ring, like he's going to do a moonsault. And I'm thinking, what the heck? Like Whitmer doesn't do a moonsault. And then Marufuji crotches him, so he falls into the Tree of Woe, so Marufuji can do his usual Tree of Woe coast to coast drop kick. And I sometimes, not always, but sometimes, on this time, do get annoyed when wrestlers try and do moves they've never done in their life before. They will never try again, and they are only doing it clearly to put themselves in position for the move their opponent wants to do, because it just kind of takes me out of that suspension of disbelief. But sometimes I'm easier on it than others. It was just one of those things where it's like, very briefly, especially, I was like, what the heck was what? Oh, of course he's doing that. So we'll go to our reviews from the Peanut Gallery. Dave Meltzer first. He wrote, Marufuji has more ring presence than most of the guys here. It's hard to explain, but he carries himself like a superstar, which he didn't a year ago. 3 stars. I do think Marufuji has some good ring presence. I don't know if it's quite as a noticeable distinction as Dave thinks between everybody else on this roster, but
yeah, well,
I mean,
definitely not noticeable compared to like the best people on the roster.
Yeah. We go to Wade Keller next, who wrote, okay, Matt, we love one of our favorite things on the show is weird opinions Wade Keller has that no one else on Earth would have. We love that. We cherish them. This is not to pick on Wade or be mean. I genuinely love them. Matt, we have a new one. Okay, so this is Wade Keller's review. Wade writes, I've always thought Whitmer would make a good old-school masked wrestler along the lines of the spoiler. He doesn't have great facial expressions or a distinct overall look, and a masked gimmick could work for him. The notion since the early 90s that masked wrestlers have to be either monsters like Mankind or Abyss, or high-flyer cruiserweights like Rey Mysterio or Delirious does not have to be. Good match that gave Marufuji his second ROH pay-per-view showcase win and set up Whitmer as being further frustrated. Nice action, 3 stars. I love that just in that review is more than half of it is him just saying, BJ Whitmer should wear a mask. Which,
yeah, I know. I feel like
who else is thinking that?
I'd feel offended if I was Whitmer. But, Whitmer, I feel like, is the spoiler because we gave him a really, really great review after the War of the Wire 2, and then he spoiled it immediately after. So he is the spoiler.
Yeah, the ultimate spoiler. But, I mean... Yeah, I agree with you too. Like, Wade wasn't trying to explicitly, he just said, he doesn't have great facial expressions or a distinct overall look, but there is kind of something about saying, yeah, that guy should cover his face up. Like,
I know.
But like, that is a thing in wrestling sometimes. It's almost like the reverse of, like I do this sometimes where occasionally when a wrestler gets unmasked, like in Lucha, and he's really handsome, I almost get mad, like, why is he covering up his fucking face? Like that's an insult to us ugly people. Like, he's just, like, you didn't need to do that. You had a winning ticket, man. And I feel like it's almost the reverse where you're like, you might do better, honey. I'm not saying you're ugly. I'm just saying maybe people only need to see your eyes and lips, but
at least he has nice eyes and lips.
Exactly. Yeah, you could do worse. But we move on to Bryan Alvarez, and this is a very mid-aughts Bryan Alvarez gonzo reporting style review. So this is Bryan writing, we get into a big argument during this match, my buddy Craig and I. He was talking about Impact when Sanjay Dutt did a springboard low dropkick onto, I believe, Bubba. He said this was dumb. Why would someone go up high to do a low dropkick? I tried to explain that, well, if you're going to dropkick someone's knee, it would probably inflict more damage if the dropkick came from up high. He said this was absurd. So as we were arguing this, Marufuji hit Whitmer with an underhook powerbomb into a cross arm breaker. That, I said, was absurd. Why not just powerbomb the guy, or just put him into the arm breaker? Why powerbomb him into an arm breaker? How wacky is that? He said no, the dropkick was more absurd. This argument went on for some time. In the end, the point is that this match wasn't bad, but it was such that we were able to get into this big argument about which fake moves in pro wrestling are more absurd. Marufuji ended up hitting him with a super kick and a Shiranui for the win. Whitmer didn't get him over too well on the move and basically dropped him on his head. 3 stars.
Everyone who's listened to Bryan Alvarez on a podcast with anybody in recent years understands how Bryan Alvarez ends up in these arguments.
Yeah. And first off, I don't think there's any problem with the powerbomb to the arm breaker, because I always thought that was a thing of like, you want to put the wrestler in the arm breaker, but he might be too strong to defend himself. So if you can drop him down in a move like a powerbomb, in that immediate second where they're kind of stunned, their arm's going to be open and they're not going to be aware to defend it. So to me, I don't know why that is such a crazy deal. I also do like that we're continuing that Bryan's really did not like BJ Whitmer. He always finds something every match to nitpick him on.
At least he didn't nitpick him on his face.
Yeah, but it's also interesting. 3 drastically different reviews. They all came to the same 3-star end rating. But I'm looking at my notes from that. I think I wrote something that makes me feel like I'm an old man, because I wrote in my notes, Marufuji gets a lot of streamers. I miss the days of wrestling where streamers meant little paper things you throw in the ring and not heavily guarded secret business metrics everyone argues over. So I was clearly in an old grumpy mood when I watched this match.
That is a good line. That's a good line. You got to tweet it.
After the match, the crowd chants, "Please come back" at Marufuji as Lenny Leonard throws to what he calls their correspondent, Rebecca Bayless, who's standing among the fans in the crowd. She tells us that she hopes we're enjoying the show and nothing is like seeing ROH live. She plugs cities ROH will be running, but not any dates, probably because, again, this pay-per-view is going to air months and months from now, so they probably didn't even have the dates set in stone. Like, she just gives a list of the usual cities ROH runs in, and also, that is the end of the segment. It's literally just her being like, "This is fun. You should buy a ticket. I don't know when. See you later." These Rebecca Bayless things are very inessential. And that brings us to Brent Albright defeating Pele Primo via submission in 1 minute, 41 seconds when he made him tap out to the crowbar. This was exactly what you'd expect. Pele gets zero offense. Albright throws him around the ring, including a Beal that takes Pele almost, I would say, corner to corner. Pele takes a brutal-looking bump for half Nelson suplex, and Albright covers him, but listen on it too, doing the old, like, "I want to beat this guy up more" thing. He says he's going to break his arm, and then he just press slam drops him into the crowbar. Crowd was really into Albright squashing him. They were chanting for him to do it at one point, so I guess you would say if you want to, like, make Albright look like a monster, mission accomplished. Not
a monster heel, though, unfortunately.
No.
But, yeah, I mean, this was an entertaining squash. Pele did everything, and Pele does this stuff very well. I don't know why they use pay-per-view time for this. It wasn't really building up anything on a future pay-per-view that I can think of. So that would be my only critique of it, but, like, it was entertaining for what it was.
Albright also, going to the Observer review, Dave wrote, "Albright does the gun for hire gimmick. He came across strong in the squash as his offensive moves look killer. 1 star. Wade Keller wrote, "Good match is setting up Albright as a larger ROH wrestler with a killer instinct and dominant big man style. Primo was a good bump taker for him. 1 star. Brian Alvarez wrote, "For those that remember Albright's physique in WWE, well, it's different now. Much smoother and thicker, but also more powerful. He just killed the poor fucker, giving him hard forearm after hard forearm and dropping him on his head with suplexes. They showed a replay of the first forearm in this match, and you rarely see a shot that hard in MMA. A total squash, no rating." So, I'm going to make fun of Bryan, but first I will say, one thing I did appreciate about Bryan is, like, on these really short matches, he would just give an NR rating for no rating. Like, this is too short to give a rating.
Yeah, it's not really a match. It's, like, more of an angle almost. Yeah.
It is kind of absurd that, like, both Dave and Way were like, I guess this is a 1-star, 1 minute match.
Yes,
like,
yes.
Like, so I do think Bryan had the right idea sometimes with those. Like, that's why I usually don't give, like, a hard and fast rating to most matches under 5 minutes. But I do think, first off, I would love, from now on, as I age, if I ever let myself go a little more, as I have sometimes in my life, I do want now to be described as, my body is just different. It's smoother and thicker, but also more powerful. That's how I want to describe it.
Well, for that to work, you also have to become more powerful.
No can do, Matt. That's never gonna happen.
Okay.
And also I have to say, I think that was a really hard forearm. I do not agree with Matt that forearm that Brent hit Pele with was harder than what you would see in mixed martial arts.
Yeah,
you would rarely see one that hard in MMA. That means that's harder than most shoot punches.
I'm gonna say that he was joking. That's what I'm gonna say to that.
I hope so. I also did like that Pele got a highlight. Like, all the wrestlers on these pay-per-views, they get, like, these very generic highlight packages and name graphics. I did like that they even gave Pele one. I was like, good for him. You've made it, buddy. After the match, we do get that slow motion instant replay of the 1 snug forearm Albright hit on Pele. I hear it's harder than what you would see in MMA most of the time. We then get an ad imploring us to find more info on ROH. Please visit www.rohwrestling.com. It is soundtracked by, you guessed it, Dimension by WOLFMOTHER. And we see ROH clips of Samoa Joe, CM Punk, Mick Foley, Matt Hardy, Kenta Kobashi, Bruno Sammartino, Eddie Guerrero, Jushin Liger, Paul London, Terry Funk, Ricky Steamboat, Bobby Heenan, and Jim Cornette. Yes, I did rewind so I could write down all of those. It is the Norm Macdonald, all the stars are here meme, but unironic. I do think it was a good idea. Like, again, it's another one of these things where ROH was clearly trying to, any new audience fans, like, look, we're a big deal. Look at all these big names that have been here. People you could watch on our DVDs. I will say, this is the way where my mind goes, Matt. My thought was, like, I don't know who this person would be, but I imagine if you're watching this and you're like the biggest name that doesn't make the highlight reel, like that would probably, like, I always sometimes feel like I am that person, not in terms of name value, but in life, I'm like the first person that gets passed over for things. I could just imagine watching, it's like, I'm going to be next. They're going to show a clip of me. And then it just ends. I feel like that happens in life to some of us.
It does. To me, to you. That's why we do this. It gives us some meaning in life,
But they did pick a very good selection of names there. They were top-notch names. And that brings us to the ROH World Tag Team title match, the Briscoes. Jay and Mark Briscoe defeat El Generico and Kevin Steen in 16 minutes, 6 seconds when Jay pinned Generico after a spike Jay Driller. Steen and Generico get a full entrance, but with music that is neither the regular themes. The Briscoes do get Gimme Back My Bullets, the magic of paying $50,000. But the crazy thing I felt that was that between how loud the crowd was on the show and how the audio was mixed, you actually don't clearly hear much of the theme. I was like, you're paying this money. You should be making sure this is very audible. I also have to say, Steen and Generico have the ugliest, most generic name graphic you'll ever see. It looked like they just wrote it on Notepad or something. It looked terrible. So about this match, I would say it's not often when you can say a Briscoes match settled a show down, but I would say that the first 10 minutes of this match were the slowest of the show thus far. Maybe you might disagree based on how you talked about Whitmer versus Marufuji, but it's the first I felt this was the first real match on the show that didn't feel like the wrestlers involved were told beforehand that if the proverbial bus went under 55 miles per hour, their dog would be shot or something. Like that doesn't mean the first 10 minutes of this match were slow by any means. It just means that I felt like the other matches so far felt like they were wrestled special for the pay-per-view where you can't slow down, just keep doing stuff. Well, this match, it felt paced more like any Briscoes match that you'd see on any ROH DVD. In fact, that was kind of a problem for me simply because it was that Briscoes relentless mid-tempo pace that they stuck to in this era that we've talked about how it's never bad, but sometimes it can get kind of numbing. And then another issue I had with this match is it was low on personality to me in the sense of Steen and Generico have been really so fun so far on this ROH run with Steen's banter and both of them finding new ways every match to highlight their heel and face odd couple dynamic. But this match doesn't show much of that. And maybe it does, but the problem is we can see Steen talking to Generico early in the match, but the crowd's so loud that we can't hear much of it. And so I would have liked to have heard a bit more of that. I also would have loved a bit more intensity in the body of the match and some hatred because we're now firmly in the middle of this feud. And this match is the follow-up to that great wild brawl of an angle we saw on the last pay-per-view that we loved. And on top of all that, in the first 10 minutes, I felt like the match spent too much time with Generico getting beat down. When to me, the Briscoes got a great showcase match on the first pay-per-view, and with this being Steen and Generico's first official match on one of these pay-per-views, and when they're losing, that's also saying a rematch later, I would have liked them to take a lot of this match to really make a good first impression. But with all that being said, this is one of those classic reviews where I front load all the criticism and then tell you this is actually a very good wrestling match, because this match was, to me, trending to being good but slightly disappointing. And then those last 5 minutes hit. And there's a reason why on this show sometimes I say stuff like the textbook ROH final 5 minutes or they flicked the switch. And the reason why I say those things is because it really was a trope in this era of ROH that happened fairly often. And I felt like this match was a prime example of those tropes where it happens pretty often in Briscoes matches of this era in general. But you think about wrestling and some wrestlers might go, let's start this match at a 1 out of 10 in terms of intensity and stuff. And over the course of the match, we'll ramp up the pace and excitement gradually to a 2, then a 3, then a 4, and we'll keep going until we end at a 10. The Briscoes here, I felt like, and in a lot of their matches, they just start at a 6. They keep it at a 6 for 10 straight minutes. And then on a dime, they skip over 7 and 8 and go straight to 9 or 10 for the final 5 minutes. And this is a match like that where it is almost it is so abrupt. It is almost as if someone flipped a literal switch. Like I can pinpoint the exact move. Steen hits this big dive onto Jay on the floor. And from there, the energy of this match is completely different. It goes from that like generic action-packed, relentless Briscoe 6 out of 10 mid-tempo to They're doing these big spots on the outside, including one of the craziest spots we've seen in through the years, maybe ever, but at least in recent history of the pod, where Generico gets Bealed at ringside from like the inside ring area to maybe the third or fourth row of empty chairs that they've cleared away. That felt like a special spot for the pay-per-view. That felt like a souped up crazy risk that you're taking only because it was on the pay-per-view. And then they get back in the ring, and from that point on, all we're seeing is the big moves. Steen gets double stomped by Mark Briscoe through a table at ringside. That takes him out of the match. Generico's quickly now isolated 2-on-1, so he loses very shortly after that. I thought overall this match was like a low 3 3/4 stars, very good. I felt like the final 5 minutes are great. The first 10 minutes are just good, so it averages out to that. I don't think this is quite as good as the first match these two teams had a couple months ago or whatever earlier, but they gave you a couple really big memorable spots. Well, the Beal especially, I think, is more memorable than anything from that first match. And I thought they ended on some really, really high notes.
Yeah, I feel like, maybe I wasn't as granular in the why as you were, but I think I came to the same conclusion. I think this was, it's crazy to think because this was a really good match, but given how many matches they would eventually have in this feud, this was one of the lesser matches in the feud overall.
Yeah.
But it had some, like you said, really memorable spots that you just don't see very often, like the stuff in the crowd, like the Bealing. I also, that dive that you mentioned that Steen does that you said flips the switch. I really like that because Steen hit the dive onto Jay and then just started like angrily beating on him. And I think it's rare that dives, at least in this era of ROH, are intense hate-filled moves as opposed to like, oh, I hit a dive and then I play to the crowd, He hit a dive and he just kept pounding on Jay, and I really like that. I also really like the spot where Mark blocked the haluva kick by Generico and then immediately did the springboard double stomp onto Steen, who was somehow already on a table. I thought that was really cool. There were some moments early in the match that I thought were amusing, like when Lenny Leonard on commentary who said, "Don't let Steen's looks fool you. He's dirty, he's nasty. He doesn't care what he looks like, but he's a great athlete." I was like, well, that's not nice. And then there was a spot where Mark hit Generico with a Samoan drop, and Steen is on the apron and he yells, "He's not even Samoan." But yes, that was very mean of Lenny Leonard. What is he, like the Wade Keller of announcers?
Russ was getting it left and right. Yeah, I was like, too. I was like, yeah, I noted that too. I was just like, again, Lenny and Dave on pay-per-view, they get spicy, Matt.
I know. But I overall thought this was very good in the same way you did. I really liked some of those big spots at the end. I like that. I'd say here's one thing that I like about it more than a typical Briscoes match. It didn't have a million hot tag attempts. It was like a short match. What was it, like 18 minutes? And it had one hot tag, and then they just went into the hot sequence. Like, as opposed to like, oh, this is the hot tag, but then they just keep going at that same like 6 that you said. So yeah. I appreciated that. I think it was a simpler structure, and I think that benefited the match. But they have had better matches than this, and they will have even better matches in the near future.
Yeah, it was 16:06, which I think makes it the second longest match of the pay-per-view. And I do want to say, I think you made a great point about the dive, because I thought about that watching it too, where it made me think just like you thought, which is I almost felt like why people should do this more often, because so often with dives now, it's almost like a break in matches in a weird way where someone does a really cool dive to the floor and then they just kind of celebrate with the fans. And it's like, hey, this is just, I did a really cool thing and let's take a pause for a second. Where with the Steen thing, yeah, he does the dive, and that's what ramps the match up, where he's like yelling at that point. Like it's almost like this energy of, I just fucked you up and now you're in trouble because I hit this dive. Not like it's time to celebrate and gloat in a certain way, or just, take a break while everyone gets to sit on the floor for a while. And yeah, you don't get that energy on dives very often. And it was like, oh, this is actually a really cool way to do dives, actually.
The more you watch Kevin Steen in this era, the more you're reminded of what a really special talent he is.
Yeah, and I feel like some people, they didn't like the humor stuff, but stuff like that, Like, I feel like that's some of the people that were critics of Steen in this era, you know, those are the kind of intangibles they should have been like drinking up, right? Those little things. Cause those are the kind of little, I do it differently things that a lot of those reviewers that hated Steen typically love from other wrestlers. But sometimes people kind of get caught in circles, I would say. But all that being said, now we'll go to our three wise men for the reviews. And I love how this worked out, my decision to do this for the pay-per-view, because I feel like we get a bunch of tropes from each of these guys. Like you get a good picture of the typical Dave, Wade, and Bryan experience in this, and we get one here because he brings up something he's already talked before and we've discussed before. This is Dave's review of this match. He wrote, "The two teams work well together. I don't know why a guy who is as talented a worker and moves so well as Steen doesn't watch his diet. His look doesn't kill him here now because he's turned the corner with the audience, but it's a killer in making it elsewhere, which he's got the talent, but not the look they want. It's not that he's not a bodybuilder, but it's that he looks like Scott D'Amore, which isn't what anyone is looking for in main matches. Boy, everyone is
catching some strays right there, Scott D'Amore.
Imagine
oh my God.
Scott D'Amore probably was an Observer subscriber because he's into the business. So I probably think, imagine you're just sitting reading the issue and you get like sideswiped in the middle of a review. You're like, what the fuck?
Where like looks like Scott D'Amore is like of course people understand why this is an insult. You know, like it's man.
I will just reread it again just to really savor it. Quote, "It's not that he's not a bodybuilder, but it's that he looks like Scott D'Amore, which isn't what anyone is looking for in main matches."
This is the meanest group of people that we've ever reviewed on this particular show.
You know what makes it even worse? Because it would have been better for Scott D'Amore if he was like, he needs to look like a bodybuilder. The fact that he's like, he's not like, it's like the fact that Dave's couching it like, look, I'm not saying he needs to look great. He just can't look like Scott D'Amore. Like, it's even worse for Scott D'Amore. Like, I'm not saying he needs to have muscles or be attractive. You know, just don't be like, what the hell? It's insane. Anyway.
I wonder if the Lenny Leonard commentary line was like an inside joke because they all read. No, wait. He reviewed this after the pay-per-view. Never mind. Yeah. So Meltzer heard that line and he felt like he had to add to it. Great.
So Dave continues. Entertaining from start to finish, except for two crazy spots. The Briscoes do a combination heel throw where they send the guy flying. They threw him on the floor over the barricade about 3 to 4 rows deep, and there was no way Generico could land safely. To make things fair, Steen powerbombed Mark over the guardrail about 2 rows deep. With all the chairs out there, it's not safe taking big bumps out there. 3 3/4 stars.
But okay, so I get why he would say that those are like bad things to do, but he framed it as everything was entertaining except that part, which is odd.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I feel like Dave sometimes does that where he'll watch like a brutal match with bumps and he'll be like, oh, this was awful, big stars. And I know Dave, and I disagree with him on this, does the thing where he's like, well, what I objectively think of what the match is rated are two different things, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, yeah, I agree with you in the sense that thing of, he almost acts like, this wasn't good. This part was entertaining. Where I believe me and you, when we watch stuff like that, it's like, I feel guilty that I think it was good. Like this entertains me, and now I feel bad entertaining me. I'm not like, oh, this ruins the match, but I'll persevere. I'm like, I can't believe I like that.
Right.
Like,
and of course, this review is being written in an era where everyone was hypersensitive to the safety of wrestlers because of the Benoit murders.
Yeah, I that's a point that's a great point I want to make later, where we'll talk about that when we have to talk about Benoit later after the Nigel match, where I think something people are going to need to understand, especially people that didn't live through the era, is probably for the next year or two on through the years, we're entering an era where pretty much every match that had a really brutal spot gets like extra hard treatment because it evokes the memory and the specter of a guy with severe CTE who did a horrifying thing. So there's definitely I agree. Like that review is definitely like a very 2007 flavored, but it's not that those spots aren't crazy. Next, we go to Wade Keller, who wrote, "This was the first match on the show to have brawling in the crowd, so it stood out as something special. Steen's swanton was impressive and made for a believable near fall 13 minutes into the match. Excellent tag match with the incredible crowd heat, really adding to the atmosphere throughout. The Briscoes show what a push tag division can be like with a true signature team atop it. 4 stars flat."
But wait, tell me about who was attractive and what other unattractive people they looked like.
And then this was I forgot this. This was something that Bryan Alvarez on the podcast and newsletters. This was a classic Bryan Alvarez thing. And I think it will spark a little bit of interesting discussion. This is Bryan's review of the match. He wrote, "The thing with the Briscoes is that if you like old school tag team wrestling that makes sense psychologically, these are not the matches for you. They're heels, but they get the heat on the baby faces, and when the baby faces get heat on them, it builds up to nothing because they don't struggle to make a hot tag. They just eventually nonchalantly walk over and tag. If you love pretty much nonstop high spots from bell to bell, often with no rhyme or reason to them, well, these are your men. They tossed Generico over the guardrail into a bunch of empty chairs, then Steen powerbombed Mark over the guardrail into another row of chairs. Just insanely dumb bumps, and they led to nothing, in all caps, as the guys who took the bumps were back in the ring doing spots shortly thereafter. Same rating I give every Briscoes match, I believe. The best a tag match can possibly be without making enough sense to be excellent. 3 3/4 stars."
Well, did he say the Briscoes were heels?
That's the first thing. They are so clearly not the heels in this feud.
Yeah, what the fuck?
Yeah, so that makes, I know sometimes we've talked in the past about there were times where the Briscoes, it was kind of iffy, but by this point, facing Steen and Generico, they are, with Mark doing all the concussion storylines, they are clearly the baby faces. Yeah. But yeah, this is a thing Bryan did a lot with the Briscoes, and I will say, like, I agree with bits of it. There have been Briscoes matches in this era where they just have kind of a not very dramatic hot tag, very anticlimactic. And I just talked about in that review when I talked about the match. The Briscoes are in this era. I don't think like they were like this a few years earlier. And I think they eventually like settle out of it. This kind of 6 out of 10 for 10 minutes into the hot 5 where they are just kind of this relentless mid-tempo. But at the same time, I think he goes too far because I think they do still progress in their matches where the end is always the biggest stuff is saved for the end. So there is some progression. And I also think there are a lot of Briscoes matches where I'm like, okay, 3.5, 3 3/4 in this era. But then when they hit, like they are some of the greatest matches, tag matches ROH had ever had at this point. We've seen plenty of matches in this era where for all the complaints, some of them I share with Bryan, like, the Briscoes in this run, like the Aries and Strong match in the UK, the final battle match with the Kings of Wrestling, some of the matches we've seen this year, like with Shingo and Doi, and like they've had like really, really great matches. So this idea that like they cap out in 3 3/4, like there's no way, like they're like the way Bryan talks about, it's almost like they're one step above backyarders. Like they have no sense of anything, which I would not go that far, even in this era, which I feel is like them at their most kind of just all killer, no filler, let's not think about things era.
I totally agree. Like I don't have much to add, but like we've talked about all these Briscoes matches. We know what the flaws are. We also can very clearly hear from that Alvarez review what his personal biases are. Yeah. And, you know, I wonder if he even remembers that he thought that, if you asked him now.
Like, I didn't include this because I didn't catch it till way late, and plus that show was already long. But Bryan did a review of Respect to Zern, the first pay-per-view, and that match that everyone thought was the show stealer, the Claudio and Seidel versus Briscoes tag, and you know, that everyone raved about. Bryan's review was basically like, if this was like 5 or 10 minutes shorter, it would be twice as good, or something to that effect. And it's like, I don't think you're right on this, and I don't think anyone else in the world agrees with you, but, you know, to each his own. But after the match, the Briscoes celebrate, but as they leave the ring, Kevin Steen attacks them out of nowhere with a ladder. Steen grabs Generico and points to the fallen Briscoes, telling Generico, that's what you need to do. Steen blows snot on Jan Mark to end the segment. The one negative I'd have to this is, again, typically as a feud goes on, you want things to escalate and get bigger, and this felt like a step back. The last pay-per-view was this really exciting, long and involved Steen and Generico attack on the Briscoes that just kept going and going. They've already done during this feud, I think, at least a couple Mark Briscoe concussion angles as well. And yet here, the final build pay-per-view viewers see before they have like the main event of the next pay-per-view in a big ladder match is Steen hitting the Briscoes once or twice with a ladder after a match they lost definitively. And I was like, I feel like they could have done more, but maybe I'm nitpicking.
I didn't agree with that. That what you just said. I think they really telegraphed where they were going with it.
Yeah.
But this was a pay-per-view. They had a limited amount of time. I think what they did was fine, honestly. But I do think it was very funny when Prazak said, "This isn't sportsmanlike." This is a funny line coming from him.
Yeah. We then cut to Larry Sweeney, Chris Hero, and Matt Sydal backstage. Larry tells Matt that he will not regret making a decision to join them, and then says, "Look at that marketable face." So, in other words, not like Scott D'Amore. Larry thinks you can see that face on a Wheaties box. I wrote my notes for testing this podcast. I can't believe I'm just reading this now. I forgot this. I wrote my notes. Have you ever actually had Wheaties, Matt? I wrote in my notes. Like, remind yourself to ask Matt, has he ever eaten Wheaties?
Yes, I've eaten Wheaties.
There is
not since I was a kid, I don't think, but I have eaten Wheaties. Yes,
we do not have Wheaties here. To my chagrin, Matt, grape nuts.
There's just a lot of flakes out there. I've had Total, I've had Corn Flakes, I've had Frosted Flakes, I've had Bran Flakes, I've had Raisin Bran, Special Kid. There's flakes all over the place, and
for some reason.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was just for some reason I just want a soundbite of Matt Feuerstein adorably saying, "There's just a lot of flakes."
There are.
I was like,
well, Trevor, have you ever been on the dating scene? Because
or we could also use that for like you endorsing like Selsun Blue or some dandruff. It's just you going. There's just a lot of flakes out there, isn't there, folks?
I do not have dandruff. It'd be fine
I'm not saying you do.
It'd be fine. It'd be fine if I did, but I don't. But yes, no. What I'm trying to say is, when I was a kid, I liked to try all the cereals. Did I ever tell you and the Deep Vein Thrombosos that for my 30th birthday, which was a very long time ago now, that I had a cereal party for my birthday because I hadn't had cereal in a while, and I invited all of my guests to bring a different kind of cereal, and we all mixed and matched cereals.
I might have vaguely heard of that, but I don't think you've told the viewers, the Deep Vein Thrombosos. But that's another weird coincidence because I went out of my way. I haven't had it in years, but I was just like, I had a craving one day where I was just like, I want Honey Bunches of Oats. And like, I went out and bought milk and the cereal. I would just have like one bowl of it. I'm like, I'm making a special trip. I'm going to eat this goddamn cereal. And it's pretty good, Matt. It's still pretty good. I
don't eat cereal very often, almost never, honestly, at this point. But that cereal party, which again was a very long time ago, It was very enjoyable, but when I do have cereal, I can't have milk. It fucks me up. I'm too lactose intolerant. I opt for the oat milk.
Yeah, there's so many options now too. There are even those regular milks that they pull the lactose out, I guess.
Yes, I'd rather just have the oat milk. But I'm looking at a picture now of all the cereal boxes from my cereal party, and someone did bring Honey Bunches of Oats. Here's what I'm seeing. Can I tell you all the cereals that I see in the picture?
Of course.
Okay, so I see Honey Bunches of Oats. I see a Life. I see Lucky Charms. I see Honey Smacks. I see Cinnamon Toast Crunch, Apple Jacks, Rice Krispies, Raisin Bran, Cracklin' Oat Bran, which I had never had, but it does taste like oatmeal raisin cookies, I remember. Puffins, Golden Grams. I see Crispix. I see Honey Nut Cheerios. Somebody brought chocolate Lucky Charms. Nobody brought Wheaties. Much to my chagrin, so we did not get to enjoy looking at Matt Sydal way back in 2013 when I turned 30. Yeah, Cookie Crisp, nothing like cookies.
Oh God, I remember. Because one of the fun quirks of being Canadian is you get like 70 or 80% of American products, but you miss out on the rest, but you see commercials for them all. And I remember for years I saw Cookie Crisp commercials and it like you would expect for a young child captured my imagination of cookies for breakfast. And I remember once we went on vacation to America and I made my parents like mid-vacation buy a box of Cookie Crisp, and you did not see ever in history a more disappointed child. Where I just said what you said. This does not taste like cookies for breakfast. I was so mad.
Right, it would be so easy to just like put like mini, like I don't know, Chips Ahoy cookies, and you know what I mean? Like, yeah, and like that would be a Cookie Crisp, and like it's not like real Cookie Crisp is better for you, right? So what's the difference?
They actually have a Chips Ahoy cereal now. I never buy it, but I see it at the store. but yeah, that's quite a selection. We should get back to the show, but I will say my favorite cereal of all time was limited edition. It was Chocolate Toast Crunch. It was amazing. I see in America, they now have a limited edition Mexican hot chocolate toast crunch. I'm hoping that comes here and tastes similar because that is my all-time goat cereal. But I would say Honey Bunches of Oats with almonds is my second favorite. What would be like a Matt Feuerstein top three?
Well, I was going to say, when you just said that, you were about to say Honey Bunches of Notes, which would be like the Trevor Dame cereal, because you take such copious notes.
Or that'd be like a great jazz album from like the 50s, like 12 love songs, Honey Bunches of Notes.
Everyone loves Cinnamon Toast Crunch, and I cannot argue with that. I actually think Life cereal is extremely underrated, and enjoy it very much. Honey Bunches of Oats is high on the list. Also. I do love those shitty cereal marshmallows. So like Lucky Charms and Chocolate Lucky Charms and Count Chocula and all that stuff. I was a big fan of that. There are cereals that were like around when I was a kid, like in the 80s, that I remember being really good that I obviously don't like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle cereal. If you remember that. Like that had like, I don't know, it had like puffs and like, but also it had, marshmallows in it. And then I feel like I've even had and enjoyed when I was a kid. Like, I'm pretty sure I even remember this, and it probably wasn't good, but I remember liking it. Did you ever try as a kid Mr. T cereal?
I've only heard, I've probably seen the box online 60 times. I never actually had it. I don't know if that one I don't think had the marshmallows in it, but I know my parents were more hesitant to give me like we were a Crispix house and a Rice Krispies house.
Yeah.
Mostly.
So my family was terrible about like moderating the amount of junk food that I ate as a kid, like terrible. So I mean any piece of shit food that I wanted, my parents probably were like, oh yeah, that does sound good, and they would get it too. So I got to try all that shit, and it's amazing that I am not currently diabetic.
Two more quick notes before we get back, I swear. But I unless you have any, you know what? Let's just make this a serial podcast. But that'd be fun if we just abandoned
list them and learn, baby.
Bring it back. But two funny things. One thing is my parents didn't. They bought regular Kellogg's cornflakes instead of Frosted Flakes because they said Frosted Flakes were bad for you. And my dad, without fail, every time he had a bowl of Kellogg's cornflakes, would put half a jar of sugar on the bowl of cornflakes. I was like, you know what you're doing, right? Like this, you have made Frosted Flakes. So that was insane. And also, you were talking about the marshmallows. I never got a lot of the cereals with the marshmallows. I just saw this in stores. It probably has been in America for years. It was Canadian late, probably as always. But you've seen recently, or not recently, but like they now sell just the Lucky Charm marshmallows.
Yes,
just separate in the bag.
I've never had it, but I know of that. Yes, it has been around America for a long time. Yeah.
Like, I feel that's a big difference in our lifetimes where when we were kids, there was a lot of stuff where like, oh, this is the best part of this, but you have to eat the whole thing. Where I feel like when I was a kid, when my parents had fruit salad, I think a lot of kids had this experience where your favorite parts of the fruit salad were the cherries and the peaches, but you had to eat the whole fruit salad to have them. Like in my adult life, they now make something that is just cherries and peaches. Like I feel like they do that with everything now. They're so desperate to milk every dollar they can where it's like, do you just like the one part of this? We'll just sell you that. We don't care. Just buy this, please. Like it's crazy what they do now. Kids today, they don't know how good they have it.
I agree. It's crazy what they do now. That's my conclusion.
Anyway, I forgot. Mid Larry Sweeney segment, Larry tells us that Sarah Del Rey is off right now doing an endorsement deal he arranged. Larry says he has Claudio Castagnoli right where he wants him because Claudio won't get his hands on Hero, Seidel, or Larry himself until the money is right and all conditions have been met to his liking. Larry has arranged to have the finest athletic facility arranged to his liking for his boys, at which point Seidel walks over one step to use a very generic, cheap-looking weight machine. We then pan over to see Tank Tolan coaching Bobby Dempsey through his 100th rep on a weight machine. Tank tells Bobby that was pretty good for a disgusting excuse for a human being.
I thought he was going to call him Scott D'Amore for a second.
He then asks him for 100 more reps without using his hands. They mock Bobby as Sally Dempsey. Tank then says he has some motivation for him and pulls out a chocolate cookie, holding it just out of Bobby's reach, so he does crunches with the machine trying to get it. Bobby smiles at this point and has his tongue wiggling out of his mouth for the cookie and hurts himself doing the stomach crunch. Tank calls Dempsey pathetic and has everyone but Bobby get to take bites of the cookie in front of him as Tank says, "No cookie for you."
I love Seidel like patting his chiseled abs while he ate the cookie.
Yeah, the ultimate cocky move. I can eat this cookie. It's okay. Like, just what a jerk. ROH World Title match. Takeshi Morishima successfully defends the title when he defeats Jimmy Rave via pinfall in 3 minutes, 56 seconds after he hit a backdrop driver. Rave gets an abbreviated entrance with no audible House of the Rising Sun, while Morishima gets his full entrance with its usual theme, so I imagine that's a Noah created theme that they have the okay for. It's been interesting to see how Gabe has used Morishima on pay-per-view versus DVD, because he's been introduced to pay-per-view viewers now with 2 squashes and a tag match. And in fact, the announcers emphasize how Morishima has now defended the title in 2 sub-4-minute matches on pay-per-view, where when you look at DVD, Morishima is still booked dominantly, but he tends to be in longer matches that are aimed at them still trying to be DVD selling matches, quote unquote, where on the pay-per-view, the way these pay-per-views are structured, I feel like Gabe feels maybe a little more open to, like, I can just throw in a few squashes on these shows to kind of in the cracks between the bigger matches. And yeah, Rave gets squashed here, although he does actually get some offense in. He takes Morishima off his feet with a spear. He puts him in the heel hook. But overall, this was pretty by the numbers. Morishima attacks Rave, not just before the bell, but before he takes off his own shirt and before anyone was able to clear out the streamers or the ring so they get all tangled up. We get a few of Morishima's most impressive signature spots, like the top rope drop kick, the back, and he hits the backdrop driver to win. And this did feel like the end was near for Jimmy. Like, even though I know it's Jimmy who ends up asking out of his contract, and he had just signed a contract with Ring of Honor, I know Whitmer got squashed in even less time on the first pay-per-view, but that was in service of fueling this losing streak gimmick for Whitmer that would eventually lead to him being repackaged as a heel. Rave, meanwhile, like, since he came back from the broken jaw, it doesn't feel like ROH has any significant plans for him. He's just a spare part. He feels to me like Homicide felt after he lost the world title, where as soon as he lost that world title, they were like, well, we're out of ideas. We're just going to run out the string with you. It's like as soon as he lost the feud with Nigel, where it actually felt like he had some momentum, they were just like, when you come back from your broken jaw, we got nothing. And it's very weird that it changed that quickly. But what do you think about all of this? Yeah,
that part's a little bit sad. And what's also sad is that I feel like Jimmy Rave could have had a good competitive match with Morishima if they wanted to. But given what they were going for, I don't really have any complaints about this. I thought Morishima's offense looked pretty good. I thought the spot where Morishima backdrop out of the pedigree, but Rave locked in the heel hook was a good spot for Rave, but he didn't really get very many of them. And while this wasn't a total squash, it was essentially a squash. So came off well for Morishima, but, poor Jimmy Rave. That's how I feel.
Yeah. We'll go to the reviews now. Dave Meltzer wrote, Morishima was announced at 149 kilograms, which they said was just under 300. Although 149 kilograms it would be closer to 328 pounds. And then this is what Dave wrote. Although 149 kilograms would be closer to 328 pounds, and seeing that missile drop kick always get over, period. Okay. Dave continues, the idea they were pushing is Morishima wins another match in less than 4 minutes. This is an attempt at an education process not to count on matches being long. Good as far as a short match goes, 1.25 stars. Wade goes, the announcers did a good job running down Rave's past feuds and general history with ROH. It made Morishima's definitive quick win seem more impressive that Rave had such a history with ROH and was advertised as a top challenger. I would have opted for a little more backstory and hype regarding why Rave was awarded the title match so that when Morishima won so quickly, it wouldn't have seemed like it was expected and no big deal. 2.25 stars. And then Brian Alvarez wrote, Jimmy, by the way, was wearing brown tights. Shawn Michaels did that once, shortly after his comeback. I believe he once said that was the biggest regret of his career. No rating. So that's the Brian Alvarez review. One thing we should have done, I believe, Matt, is Morishima's nose was bleeding yet again during this match. We should have, when Morishima started his ROH run, we should have kept a counter of number of matches Morishima gets a nosebleed in, because we'd be up to like 4 now, I think. So, that, the poor guy, he gets frequent nosebleeds. Some of us have that seasonally. Poor guy. After the match, Lenny says they anticipated this match going longer, so they're so they're short on matches. So they're going to show us a recent number 1 contenders match between Nigel McGuinness and Bryan Danielson that took place in Philadelphia. So this was weird, Matt, because this does give them a reason for the mid-show venue change, but you didn't really need to stretch the fine one. You could just say, we're going to show you another match now from another one of our shows. And part of me does like the old school, like we have a standby match vibes, but on the other hand, this made no sense because they're acting as if they originally didn't intend to air this match on pay-per-view, which one makes that match seem a little less special, this main event coming up. And also the Morishima Rave match went almost 4 minutes and they still had 34 minutes left on the pay-per-view. So in kayfabe, how long was ROH possibly expecting a Takeshi Morishima versus Jimmy Rave match to go? Like, did they think this was going to go
Broadway?
Yeah. Like, and also, in what world would ROH in this stage in their careers think, what should main event our second pay-per-view ever? Jimmy Ray versus Morishima. Like, it makes no sense the way they framed this. It's weird. But and
you know who shouldn't be on the pay-per-view? Bryan Danielson and Nigel McGuinness.
First, we go to the largely empty building after the show, though, Matt, because the ring is being taken down. An on-screen graphic reads, "We'll go to Philly in a moment." Adam Pearce is with Shane Hagedorn, telling him that after shows is a time to reflect. He tells Shane that everyone has needs. Shane, the brown-noser, says, "I need you to know how much I respect you, sir." Adam, in a classic ROH way too extreme close-up, says need will make each of us do things we regret. Things that we might not be proud of. Need, if it consumes us, will drive us insane. Pierce says everyone in ROH's locker room has need, be it for the need for money, championships, fame as ROH branches out into 50 million homes on pay-per-view. Pierce says BJ Whitmer, since the beginning, has needed the approval of us fans. And at this point, we see the camera shows that BJ is sulking alone in the bleachers off in the distance. Adam says, we have a bloodthirsty need to be part of something that we can't do on our own. Whitmer has pandered to us for acceptance, and he's been broken, battered, and bruised. He's on a losing streak. He's on a downward spiral because of need. Pierce says he knows what Whitmer needs. He knows what we need. And in time, we'll know how he satisfies his needs. At this point, Pierce walks over across the facility to Whitmer. He talks to him for a moment. He hugs Whitmer, and then he punches him in the face, smiling as he walks away with Brent Albright. So we are continuing this Hangman 3 storyline. This was very dramatic, man. I don't know if you have thoughts on this.
I mean, I kind of like this stuff. I'm a sucker for these Adam Pearce, like, overwrought promos. And I think he does a good job. I think it gives it's just different than the other stuff on ROH shows. I think the one thing I don't like about the overall Adam Pearce promos is that his character in the ring just doesn't correspond. He's such like an old school, like, stooging, like, heel, and then he has this serious, like, intellectual approach to promos. But then he comes out to the ring, he's like, "Shut up, fatso!" It just it doesn't totally line up to me. But on its own as a promo, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's something I agree with. I was going to bring that up during the Pierce match we get to later, where like, it's not that the promos are bad, but it's really weird that they're selling Pierce as like this very sophisticated, measured master manipulator and planner who is plotting something. And at the same time, then you watch his matches and he's fully in his era of taking out the Repo Man mask and getting squashed.
Yes.
So and I realize again that Gabe's philosophy in wrestling was, if you're going to get a big gimmick change or heel turn or something, that will erase some losses and some embarrassing performances. And sometimes I agree with that. I feel like, again, maybe by the nature of Gabe having to sync this up with the pay-per-views, having it literally be on the same show, if you bought this DVD, that serious promo and him being Repo Man, it doesn't work for me in that sense. That's too much.
Agreed.
But anyway, some of that worked for you, Matt. Did the main event of the pay-per-view, the ROH world title number one contendership match between Bryan Danielson defeating Nigel McGuinness via ref stoppage in 24 minutes, 31 seconds when Nigel McGuinness passed out in the cattle mutilation work for you. And I will just remind people before I throw it to you, this was the match they taped in Philadelphia at the Dominion show on June 9th, 2007. Domination, not Dominion. Yeah, that's a New Japan show. They did certainly not do their Domination. And we talked about on that show, but the story of that match, of course, was that night. They just told fans that show was going to have Matt Sydal versus Bryan Danielson and Nigel McGuinness versus a mystery opponent. At the start of the show, they said Danielson's been hurt, so the card's being changed, but we promise you will not be disappointed with the show tonight. Then before the Nigel match, they have Bobby Cruz, and I believe that you can see the crowd being really excited when you watch this match where he had just made that announcement that, this match is going to be taped for pay-per-view, which I don't think the crowd knew. And then they announced the mystery opponent is Bryan Danielson, who's healthy after all. And one thing that I really think you can tell watching this match, you can tell that was the right strategy, because that Philly crowd, compared to even though they were a good crowd for that show when we watched it, you can tell the idea that you're getting this surprise pay-per-view match that you didn't think was going to happen. They are ultra keyed up, I think, at moments for that.
Oh, I remember it almost feeling live in the building, like the crowd was like, we're performing now.
Yeah.
Like that's almost what it was like. It's like, I mean, and a lot of people might not like that because it's inauthentic, but like, I think it comes across really well.
So, Matt, what'd you think about this now back on pay-per-view? This is a big and notable match, especially even for these two guys. 2
3/4 stars. No, I mean, if you've listened to me before, we did a whole Bryan Danielson tribute special last year where we ranked the top 10 Bryan Danielson matches in our opinions. And, I only included one McGuinness versus Danielson match, and so did you, and they were different matches, but this one was the one that I included. And my logic is, while the unified match has more emotion, a bigger climax, is more memorable in many ways, and the match at the 6th anniversary show has a really intricate and well-plotted storyline and great character work, this match is their peak against each other in terms of ring work and intensity, and I would say just like perfect execution of everything they were doing. And I'd say wall-to-wall crowd heat. And I have not been assuaged of that opinion by watching it again. Like, I really do think they were just operating on such a high level of excellence in terms of what they were doing here that I think it's something to behold. Like, just like, yes, the crowd was going crazy, and yes, I think they were performing a bit. Like they were very early on, they were chanting one of the loudest "you're going to get your fucking head kicked in" chants that we've heard. There's a lot of like, this is awesome stuff early. There was "this is wrestling," and I get that could be cringe for some people, but I think it also did eventually carry over to them being interested in what was actually happening instead of just like cheering for the concept of the match. I forgot that we actually did get the final countdown on the show, but was it like a cover version of the final countdown? I forget how
that was bizarre because it sounded like the real final countdown, and you don't hear it a lot, but it's crazy because we've talked about the whole story of how, even Tony Khan has famously talked about how that he only used it a couple times because that's prohibitively expensive. And yet the only thing I could think of was like, did they do this and then edit it out of the pay-per-view? But I'm pretty sure that this because we watched the DVD version.
You mean like this was on the DVD but not on the pay-per-view?
Yeah, but
I feel like it was the same thing. Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah, I agree, but I was just trying to think, how in the world did they do this? Because they are not, they generally don't do this, and they're not allowed to. I don't think,
unless it was just cheaper back then, which I guess is possible. They upped the price after that. But yeah, I mean, I'll go through the match because I think that it's a really well worked match. We start on the mat, like Bryan just like bending Nigel's arm, then his leg, then we get some MMA style sequences where Danielson tries to hit Nigel with forearms and Nigel's like in the guard. And like the one story of this match that I can tell you is Danielson is wrestling very aggressively. Like there is very little like smarminess coming from Danielson. Like he's definitely acting like the heel. because he's so aggressive. He has like his mean face on basically the whole match. Like I don't even remember seeing a smirk from Danielson in this match, and all he was doing for 2006 was smirking.
Yeah.
And like I don't like there's a spot where Bryan goes for a handshake after a hold, and after Nigel shakes it, Danielson smacks him in the side of the head. Nigel comes back with a slap. There, Nigel starts working aggressively on Danielson's arm, as opposed to Danielson, who worked aggressively on everything. And when Nigel finally hits a lariat, Danielson escapes to the floor, and Nigel basically does an ole ole uppercut, which I think he also does later on in the Chris Hero match we're going to review in a little while. We get some stuff on the floor with Danielson throwing McGinnis into the timekeeper, or he throws the timekeeper's table onto McGinnis, right onto his head. We get Nigel getting thrown back in the ring, which leads to that rebound floor lariat, which is my rebound lariat of preference. And he lariats Danielson in over the guardrail into the crowd, and then he comes off the top with a big dive into the crowd, a big crossbody. And then he goes for another ole ole uppercut, but Danielson cuts him off, forearms, suplexes the small of Nigel's back onto the guardrail, which, of all the spots in this match, like other than the headbutts, I feel like that might have been the craziest spot in the match. Right back first onto the guardrail. And at that point, Danielson plays to the crowd in in an aggressive, energized way, not the way he would have done it in 2006. They have a pretty long sequence on the floor, actually. Then we get back in the ring, and Danielson's working aggressively over Nigel's back. He starts repeatedly punching Nigel right in the nose. And at that point, he delivers the first headbutt of the match right into Nigel's jaw. Keeps slapping Nigel, but eventually McGinnis, he fires up, blocks an uppercut, spins around with a big lariat. The crowd starts really getting behind him at that point, starts making his comeback here. He does, I would say at this point, the one sort of whiff of the match, which is a less than stellar super kick, but he immediately follows up with a lariat, so you kind of forget about that pretty quickly, and the crowd is completely forgiving here. We almost get a spot where Danielson knocks Nigel out with a kick to the side of the head. We get a spot where Danielson signals for the headbutt. Nigel catches him on the top, goes for the Tower of London, but Danielson fights him off, hits a top rope, sunset flip, but Nigel rolls through that, and they do a reversal sequence that ends with McGinnis catching Danielson on a leapfrog and dropping down into a power bomb with a pinning combo, gets a near fall off of that. There's a spot where McGinnis gets a headstand for the second time, but Danielson drop kicks him in the face, causing him to fall onto the top rope, and that allows Danielson to set him up for the belly-to-back superplex for a near fall, locks in the chicken wing, and we actually get a "please don't tap" chant. And I like it during this the pay-per-views, the announcers give a little bit more backstory than they normally would. They make sure to note that the crossface chicken wing is how Danielson won the world title to begin with. And Nigel powers out all the way into a Tower of London, but he can't follow up. And Nigel hits Danielson with, I thought, a really good version of that rope straddle lariat, but Danielson gets his foot on the bottom rope. And then eventually they stand up with their heads touching, and they have a big strike battle mid-ring. Danielson winning, and then they go into this very famous headbutt battle that ends with a Nigel lariat, but then Danielson pops up and his head is just bleeding like crazy. And I'm almost positive that there was no blading there. And then Danielson blocks the rebound with a forearm, then a suplex right into the cattle mutilation. Then Nigel flips over. Danielson goes back into the cattle mutilation, does the elbows, goes back into another cattle mutilation, but McGinnis has been knocked out. The match is over. I just thought the match just had such a relentless pace, and the intensity was so high the whole time. The finishing sequence was insane, and it's pretty terrifying that Danielson did that to himself hard way, if that is exactly what happened. And at the time, I think that finishing sequence, to those of us who watched it again, after this, when it came out in September, it was just impossible not to think about Benoit, and I think that took the match down for a lot of people. I think watching it now, you could feel a little bit more removed from that, because I think all of us have sort of let our guards down a little bit. I'll be honest, even me, as someone who was like very, very upset about what was going on at the time. So I can watch it now with a little bit less guilt than I watched it at the time, even though that's probably bad. But like, I just thought like it had such, like in that vacuum, it had such an incredible pace and intensity and this loud crowd. And like, Nigel was great, but I think this was like the Danielson show. Like, he really, like, his aggressiveness really stood out. I'm not sure if we ever saw Danielson more intense than we saw him here to this day. And like, that's saying a lot for Bryan Danielson. And we got, after this, one of the most appreciative post-match crowd cheering sequences in a while, the thank you both chant. Like, yeah, it didn't have maybe the gravitas and the drama of some of their other matches, but I just thought the intensity and the pace just really put this over the top for me. I think this is, in a lot of ways, the peak of both of these guys in their rivalry with each other. I really loved it.
Yeah, a match is good when Matt goes that in depth, and now I have a ton of thoughts. Like, sometimes I can judge how good a match is by, I've written way too many notes, but like, I have a lot of thoughts about this match. I'll try and do it as succinctly as I can. Like you, like I also talked a little bit about this match on the 6-hour Danielson special we did last year, even though I didn't pick this as my Danielson-Nigel match. And I think on that show, I talked about how it was hard for me to pick a best Danielson-Nigel match because it depends what you want and what you've seen and what you're in the mood for. Like, I think the unified match, which I think I ended up picking, has the best atmosphere, or as the kids say, I don't even know if kids say or anyway, it's probably already passé. And I think it has the best final few minutes, but I think other matches they've had are more complete and more satisfying from start to finish. The 6th anniversary show, to me, match is a contender, but to me, that match is more about a great individual Nigel one-night performance than anything else. The Weekend of Champions Night 2 match is even, in 2006, is even worthy of being a dark horse pick to me, because I think it has some of the best technical wrestling ROH had up to that point, and it plays off the pure rules in a really fun way. But the match I'd recommend to people who have never watched a Danielson-Nigel match before is probably this one, because it's the one where I feel like you need zero context to get basically full value from watching it. One thing that I've really become more aware of by doing this podcast, where we rewatch not just every show in order, but every match in order, is how much context can affect how much you enjoy matches. Like, I've tried the show to let the listener know when I've liked a match more because it played off other matches we've seen, be it like because it had little callbacks or progressions or payoffs to things we've seen before. And likewise, I've tried to let you know when I probably have liked a match less, just because I've seen so many like it. Like, the good example of that would be all the 4-ways. There's a lot of 4-ways where I say, at this point, ROH history, I probably would like it less than a lot of people, because I've seen so many very similar ROH 4-ways that have the same tropes and the same structure. And I always do all of that not to try to act like I appreciate matches more than you, the listener, or make them feel like they have to watch every single thing to really appreciate a match, but just to let them know that they might not have the same context as me. And if they don't have the same context as me, they might like a match a little less or a little more than I do. But in fact, a lot of times when I like a match more because of the extra context, I might like it maybe an extra, I don't know, like 5 to 15% more. And I think you can make a strong argument that unless you like watching every show to begin with, watching that many extra hours of wrestling so that an occasional match is a tiny bit more fun to you is probably not a good use of your time in life. But all that being said, I look at those other Danielson matches, and I feel like Unified gains something if you're invested in it being ROH's first weekend in the UK and Nigel's home nation and the big deal nature of the unification of the titles and all that stuff that contributes to the aura. I think the 6th anniversary match gains a lot based on if you had followed the saga of all of Nigel's injuries in the months before that show. I think the Weekend of Champions match gains things, obviously, if you have a lot of knowledge and experience watching pure rules matches and can appreciate what a clever twist and novelty that finish was. But I feel like this match, you can come in cold and watch and get like 98% of what I get out of it. That's what I've normally thought, Matt. And then a funny thing happened rewatching this match again, because I had recently rewatched it for the Danielson special we did. And then when I rewatched it this time, instead of just watching it in isolation, I obviously watched it after watching every other match on this pay-per-view in order. And I feel like the context did make me appreciate it a bit more in a different way, because this time, like, having watched this pay-per-view, which I would say had two matches that were just spot very quickly, two squashes, a very 2007 Briscoes match. In that context, I felt like I appreciated more what this match brought to the pay-per-view. I enjoyed everything on this pay-per-view to one level or another, but this is the only match on this pay-per-view that feels like it has a fluid progression, like a bunch of different stages to it. And, you know, if I said the Briscoes match was like a 6 out of 10 for 10 minutes and then a 9 out of 10 for the final 5, you know, I would say, and if the spot fests on the show were like 8 out of 10 from start to finish, this is a match that really does it. Like, it builds, it has peaks and valleys. It starts at a relatively low number and then it escalates to this big peak in the middle of the match, and then it settles down for a little bit, and then it builds back up again to an even bigger peak at the end of the match, which is definitely a 10 out of 10. And it's because it's the only match on the pay-per-view like that, comes after all those other matches on the show. I felt like watching in context, it felt like even more of a struggle, even more of a big fight, even more of like just a strategic match. Like you said, the crowd for this match is great. They're incredibly pumped. Like you said, maybe almost a little performative, but like you, I felt like it worked. I felt like that crowd, a lot of times we talk about Ring of Honor crowds that are really loud and lively. This was a crowd, that Philly show, where for this match, it almost sounded not just like they were loud, but it sounded like there were more people there than there was, because I think the attendance for that show was probably 600 or 700. At times during that match, it sounds like 18 to 2000, like 1800 to 2000. It sounds really huge. And I loved how they worked this match, where to me, it felt like Danielson's the better wrestler in terms of technical and all-around ability, but Nigel isn't far behind. And on top of that, Nigel has the strength advantage where he could win the match even as an underdog. Like, I love how they treated Nigel's lariat in the body of this match, where one issue I had with this era of Nigel is sometimes I felt like he overdid his lariats and a lot of his other signature spots to the point where it felt like that made up a huge, disproportionately huge chunk of some of those matches. And what's great here is the lariats feel like these big haymakers that can swing the momentum in his favor. The first maybe 8 minutes of this match are almost all grappling, submissions, stuff like that. And then when Nigel hits a short arm lariat, it's the spot that it feels like it's the spot, it's the first lariat of the match, and it feels like it's the one that breaks this match open. Bryan sells it big, he goes to the floor, and it's from that moment where the match opens up and it becomes more of a fight. It almost feels like Bryan's been wounded. And later in the match, Nigel hits this big spinning lariat, and it goes against the momentum of the match, where Bryan has this big run of offense, and that lariat just stops it dead in its tracks. And this match had that vibe that some legit fights have, where, you know, one fighter is technically better than the other, but the other guy has that puncher's chance, where he has such a great strength and such a great punch that if he just hits the right shot, he could end it even if he is a little bit of an underdog. And you still do see all of Nigel's signature spots here, but nothing felt spammed in this match the way it could in some other Nigel matches. I would say everything he did in this match was tastefully done, is how I put it. Like, everything was in its right place for the most parts, in the right amount. I do feel like maybe they started to maybe push that in the final minutes, but that was in the interest of them having a big final few minutes where they throw a lot of big stuff at you. But overall, I felt this was a very smartly structured match. There's so much great stuff here. Like, I love how much of a grumpy, aggressive bully Bryan was during this match. I love how he goes after Nigel's nose, which Bryan has gone after wrestlers' noses before, but for some reason, it always just seems like the biggest dick move to go after a wrestler's nose, which, you know, is probably preferable than a lot of other targets. But for some reason, when you go after some guy's nose, it just feels like you're the biggest asshole in the world. I love how after the middle of the match, there's this mini peak in the middle of the match where they go to the floor that you talked about, where Nigel then does this big dive into the crowd, and Bryan throws a chair and table at Nigel. And when it goes back into the ring, Bryan tries to slow it down on the mat again. But in this really, again, to your point, this really aggressive way. Like, in this match, he's grinding his knuckles into Nigel's temples, into his ear, all over the place. Like, even some submissions, like when he does a stranglehold in this match, it feels a little snugger than he might normally do. And I love how you can see him play less to the crowd in this match than most, because it almost feels like he knows from that reaction right at the bell, we have this crowd. I don't need to play to these people. I can be even more intense and more just deadlocked on Nigel, because there's no need to try and encourage and tease out reactions from these fans. They're going to give them to us. And I like Nigel flipping his normal key lock into a pin attempt. I thought that was cool. I like that thing you talked about, that rare, we don't see Nigel do a lot of power bombs, but he catches Bryan mid-air, mid-leapfrog, and hits a power bomb. I love how when they had Nigel take that horrific suplex you mentioned on the barricade to the small of the back, they had him sell it his back, not consistently, but at a couple key moments later in the match. And it all builds to this moment where Nigel hits the Tower of London. But he goes for it, but his back hurts too much to lift Bryan onto the turnbuckle. And then he just pauses, and you can hear him say something to the effect of like, fuck it. And he forces himself to do it a second time through the pain, and he does. And he hits the Tower of London, and it gets this huge reaction, more than most Towers of Londons. And I felt like that's such a great reaction of how you can sell an injury and still do a move, and also how if you milk something, you get more of a reaction, because there's been matches where he's done 3 Tower of Londons and not gotten the reaction. This one that he really built to got. And then there's the end, which is, like you talked about, it's controversial for the fact that it's the most memorable moment of that end is Bryan and Nigel repeatedly ramming their heads together, Bryan doing it so hard that he busts himself open hard way. It mirrors the arguably more brutal spot of Nigel busting himself open hard way by allowing himself to have his head rammed into the ring post at Unified. And like that spot at the time, well before the Benoit stuff, it did get a negative reaction, like don't fool yourself. But like we talked about, this one definitely got way more reaction because right after it happened, the Benoit stuff happened. But also to note, Bryan does the fucking crippler crossface in this match. And Bryan never did that. I know eventually he does the yes lock, which is like a crossface variation. Bryan never did the crossface. It is so weird that the match that literally happens the weekend of Benoit killing people, before we had known that he was doing that, he does the fucking crossface.
Well, this match did not happen that weekend. The Chicago portion.
Oh yeah. You're right. It aired. Yeah, the rest of the pay-per-view it was this a few weeks. It's still weird.
Yes.
Still, but you're right. You're absolutely right. So overall, I would say this isn't a perfect match to me, but it's a great match. It's 4.5 stars, I would say at least, and I'm a hard marker. I don't get to, people listen to the show when I do reference stars, I can get to 4.25. 4.5 is pretty rare for me. I think for ROH on pay-per-view, this was what the first pay-per-view was missing as an introduction for first-time viewers. Like, I like that show quite a bit, but to me, one thing it was missing was one of ROH's calling cards, which is that you've got to buy this. You've got to buy this DVD for the one match. It's going to be in the conversation for match of the year level match. And obviously you can't have that for every show. This show had it. It's this match.
And I'd go as far to say with this match, I did like it more than you, even though you liked it a lot. Like, I think this is just a stone cold all time, one of the great ROH matches of all time, just like a few of the other McGuinness and Danielson matches are.
Yeah.
If I think, controversy about headbutts aside, if they did this exact match today and worked it basically the same way, it would get match of the year conversation today. That's how I feel about this match.
Yeah, it's excellent. And I think it's also a great match to show off Ring of Honor, because I don't think like Ring of Honor had at its best had different diverse styles of matches and things going on the card. So I wouldn't say this is the one reason I like Ring of Honor. There's a lot of reasons, but I do feel like this sells one of the main selling points of ROH, which are these kind of matches, which are it's longish. It has these big high spots and the near falls that you want, but also does still have some build and some nuance. And yes, like maybe a couple spots that push the limits of what you might be comfortable watching a wrestler do to themselves. But we got to be honest with ourselves. That was occasionally part of the draw. Was holy shit! It's just the same way it was in all the '90s, all Japan. Like this is the one where they do this insane thing that will make you feel a little guilty for watching it. And this match does have that too. Even so, here, before we get to the post match, I want to do one other point. Here's a really weird thing, Matt. Did you find this weird that this match is about the number one contender? Like, the winner of this is the number one contender for the world title. But another one of those weird pay-per-view things where the next show, Nigel gets the pay-per-view title match. And granted, it's because he pins Morishima in the match, the show earlier, United We Stand, in a tag match. But it's weird that they're really trying to sell, like, it's another thing where you watch this match, oh, and Bryan's the number one contender. And then you watch the DVD portion of the match, and they're like, Nigel with a big win over Chris Hero, he goes into Japan to win the world title. Where if you're just watching this in a vacuum, you're like, he's getting a title shot after losing the number one contenders match, and he's getting it before Bryan does.
I mentioned this on the last review we did. All of that is weird, and it's just a quirk of having to do two timelines at the same time. And just the pay-per-view audience doesn't know about all the other stuff. That's basically how it works.
Yeah, bizarre. So now we get a bunch of notes. So first, we'll go to the torch. The torch wrote, the only reason the McGuinness-Danielson match took place was to use it for the pay-per-view on the domination show in Philly. The announcer of the match created an incredible atmosphere that ROH management believes would not have existed had it just been another match between Danielson and McGuinness taped for DVD. And I think Matt and I, you and I both agree with that. ROH management believes that McGuinness-Danielson could have been the best match in the series between both men. ROH Booker Gabe Sapolsky says he'll let fans decide which match between Danielson and McGuinness is the best. Quote, it might have been the best match between the two, but I'll let the fans judge that. I always love when the Torch asks Gabe for an opinion on a match or something, because all he ever says is something that steers you to buy the DVD. Like, it's never like, well, this one wasn't one of their best. It's always like, man, I thought this was great. Like, what do you expect him to say? It's always like, I thought this was amazing, but you should judge it for yourself.
I saw a headline the other day being like, Tony Khan believes that AEW will be alive and well in 10 years. And it's like, yeah, I mean, what else would he say?
Yeah, exactly. Then we go to the PW Insider, where Mike Johnson wrote at the time, Bryan Danielson needed 3 staples to close the gash in his head, suffered hard way, to your point, Matt, you are correct, sir, from a series of stiff running headbutts he and Nigel McGuinness exchanged during the closing moments of their excellent match last night in Philadelphia. Danielson isn't expected to miss any ring time. ROH taped the Danielson versus Nigel pay-per-view match last night as a way to give back to the Philadelphia audience for helping to put them on the map and as a surprise for the live crowd. So that's an interesting little wrinkle. Next, we go to the Observer. This is not Dave's review. This is Dave talking based on what he's been given live reports. Then we'll go to the review. Dave wrote here, the highlight of the weekend was about people are talking up as a potential match of the year with Bryan Danielson versus Nigel McGuinness on June 9th in Philadelphia. Danielson versus McGuinness went 24-39, and crowd heat was off the charts from start to finish. Danielson has changed his style in his return from doing the 70s Dory Funk style NWA champion, defending the title in long matches wrestling semi-technical, but doing the subtle heel stuff to cheat and maintain. Now he's changing his style to be stiffer and more based on legitimate modern moves such as the spots that occur in UFC matches. That's a tough one, although the ROH audience is the one it would work with. The finish of the match sounded sick. Both men did running Ram-style headbutts, ending with Danielson being busted open hard way and bleeding all over the place. Danielson came back with elbows to the face, similar to UFC, before putting on the cattle mutilation. McGuinness looked like he was knocked silly from the headbutts and elbows, and Danielson was covered in blood. I remember in their classic match last year when McGuinness rammed his own head into the post until he was busted open, and I thought that was just ridiculous to do that to yourself. Yet at the same time, it became an amazing spectacle because it brought the crowd to a different level. The match was designed to get Danielson over and must have done so because the ending scene will likely be Danielson all covered in blood with the whole crowd chanting best in the world at him. So I think
that is the ending scene.
So, and I do think this is interesting, Matt, because that is a great example. That was written before the Benoit does, based on just the live report. So that's an example of one. People did call out these dangerous spots before Benoit. It's not like people didn't care or weren't aware of the dangers of these things. But two, I think when I now read the other coverage that all comes after the pay-per-view, which is after the Benoit death, you're going to see how it gets a little more severe. So this is Dave's review after he saw the pay-per-view in September. Dave wrote, the early part of the match is impressive with the best mat work on pay-per-view that I've seen this year. Finish was sick as both men rammed their heads into each other. In doing so, Danielson was busted open bad. The running ram spot where they are trying to bust each other open hard way is a move they need to retire. The idea was to get Danielson over as the top contender and push him as the best wrestler in the world. Crowd was chanting best wrestler in the world at him, 4.5 stars. So, we're starting to get like Dave there saying like they need to retire this. It's starting to get a little more urgent. We go to Wade, who on his review, he wrote, Wade Keller, More great crowd heat in this one. Not enough can be said about how much they add to this match and the whole show. It's quite the scene to hear a crowd chanting, "This is awesome," during a half Boston crab in mid-ring rather than right after a big spot at ringside. The finishing sequence with the hard slap exchanges followed by the running headbutts and Danielson coming up bleeding was one of the more memorable and original moments in a match all year. Excellent match with great pacing, with realistic original mat work early, then accelerated pacing with some out of ring spots and in-ring high spots, and then a really strong finish. In one of those signature ROH moments, the crowd cheered and chanted for Nigel after he got up, and then chanted "Thank you both" as the show ended.
2 3/4 stars.
4.5 stars.
Okay.
And then Bryan Alvarez, if you want to see state-of-the-art mat wrestling with an MMA feel, the first several minutes of this match were great. Sweet God, that was one great match, 4.5 stars. I will say everyone leaned a little too much into the MMA stuff, like the reviewers, because yes, there is a spot with ground and pound that is very clearly lifted from MMA, but there's a lot of this that could just be great tight mat work that you would see in so many promotions. And I feel like this was the era where anything on the ground that was remotely snug was, this is MMA. This is MMA. It's like, it's not all MMA. There was stuff like this you could watch anywhere.
If you watch Danielson versus Low-Key with that Matt from Round Robin Challenge, the match that I love so much, you see a lot more MMA inspired stuff in that match than you do in this one. And that was years earlier.
Or even like Japan, you could see those shoot style promotions with Grant. They were MMA inspired, but even like a company like Battle or something people weren't talking about like MMA stuff. It just became, once the UFC started to grow, MMA.
But I just mean, even by Danielson standards, he was not that MMA focused in this era.
Yeah, maybe occasionally he'd add a little extra. And obviously the elbows to the head spot he lifted directly from an old MMA fight. But no, yeah, I completely agree. Like 90% or more of his mat work had roots far before the MMA, from day one. It was just him. So the time has come. We've alluded to this on a few shows. We knew this was coming. We are going to have to talk about, well, we don't have to, but if there's ever a time for this podcast to talk about Chris Benoit, this is the time. Now, normally...
Trevor, are you going to educate people who have never heard of Chris Benoit? Is that what's happening here?
Well, we'll get to it in a minute. I actually might a little bit, but but I would say this first off, which is normally when stuff comes up in time, when we talk about stuff that's even tangentially related to Ring of Honor, I like to save it for when it would come in the timeline. Technically, I normally would schedule that talking about Benoit for the next show because the Benoit murders technically, well, I know you mentioned on the last episode that technically it happened during the show if we want to be morbid, but while this show was happening, but technically we learned about it between this show, when the show was ran and when the next show happened. But I feel like because of how this story, the Benoit story, interacts with Ring of Honor, where that's kind of our in, this is the show where we need to talk about. So I do have some thoughts about Benoit, but Matt, first, I think to kind of really explain where it intersects, there's no one better to talk about it than Bryan Danielson. And there's no one that I want to hear more say the words of Bryan Danielson than Matt Feuerstein. So Matt, I think you have an excerpt from his book, Yes, his autobiography.
You mean Daniel Bryan?
Daniel Bryan, yes, forgive me, Daniel Bryan's incredible book, Yes.
All right, so here is Daniel Bryan talking about his match with Nigel McGuinness. All right, so it starts, okay, so the following month, Nigel and I wrestled each other in the main event of the second ROH pay-per-view, Driven 2007. Toward the end of the match, Nigel and I started headbutting each other without putting our hands up for protection, as if we were two rams butting heads to display our dominance. In the middle of the exchange, I was cut wide open at the top of my hairline and blood poured down my face. The fans loved it. After I won, fellow wrestler Jimmy Rave took me to the emergency room, where they closed up the cut with staples. I finished up at the hospital just in time to catch my flight home, and I felt good knowing that Nigel and I had put on a great match that the pay-per-view audience was going to love. I had no idea what was about to transpire that would shake the wrestling world for some time. On Monday, June 25th, 2007, I was in the car driving home to Aberdeen from Olympia, Washington. After 2 hours of kickboxing and jiu-jitsu, I was exhausted and content with about 15 minutes left in my hour-long ride when I got a call from my friends Mike and Christoph. They were watching Monday Night Raw, and WWE had just announced that Chris Benoit, his wife Nancy, and Chris Benoit, his wife Nancy, and their 7-year-old son Daniel had been found dead in their Atlanta home. I went straight to Mike and Christoph's apartment, and we watched Raw together in shock. Chris Benoit had been one of my favorites, and someone I'd patterned my career after. He had wrestled all over the world, getting better everywhere he went, and by the time he made it to WWE, he was one of the best wrestlers on the planet. Beyond my professional admiration, the few times I met him, he was very kind to me. I was crushed. WWE canceled the live show and ran a 3-hour tribute to Chris that night. They showed some of the biggest moments of his career, interspersed with video packages and interviews with WWE superstars who shared their personal memories of him. It was an emotional program to watch, and I ended up leaving Mike and Christoph's halfway through. The next day, horrific details started coming out. And what was eventually discovered was that Chris had killed both his wife and son, then hanged himself. The Benoit double murder-suicide horrified people, and media outlets picked up on it right away. People tried to figure out why it happened, and with speculation that it was caused by, quote, roid rage, or because Chris and Nancy's marriage was falling apart. To this day, there is no definitive reason for why it happened, and there probably never will be. But investigations led to the Sports Legacy Institute performing a series of tests on Benoit's brain, which, according to Dr. Julian Biles, was so severely damaged it resembled the brain of an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient. The type of brain damage Benoit had is known as chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, which researchers believe is connected to having multiple head injuries. CTE's most common symptoms include depression, cognitive impairment, dementia, Parkinsonism, and erratic behavior, and many experts believe CTV was a significant contributing factor in the Benoit tragedy. Multiple NFL players who committed suicide were found to have CTE as well, and the condition became a major news story in itself. There was a palpable shift in the nationwide awareness of the dangers of head injuries and concussions. Chris Benoit popularized a wrestling style that was hard-nosed and aggressive with lots of explosive suplexes and diving headbutts off the top rope. Looking back on it, you can see how easy it would have been for him to have multiple undiagnosed concussions. It was the same style that influenced me and many wrestlers of the new generation. It was action-packed and exciting with an element of physical violence that was believable. That kind of wrestling is what made me and many of the other guys in ROH stand out from the pack. When Nigel and I did the headbutts in June at the Driven pay-per-view, it seemed awesome. 2 warriors ramming each other in the head until one of them bled. It made for a great visual, and spots like that showed our love for the business and our willingness to do anything for the fans. But when the match finally aired on pay-per-view on September 21st, with all the awareness around the dangers of head injuries, it no longer seemed awesome. It seemed stupid, and it seemed reckless, which made people question why they supported something that endangered the long-term health of the performers. In hindsight, Gabe told me, he'd wish they'd never aired it. After the Benoit tragedy, the perception of wrestling became so negative that many fans no longer cared to watch, especially a company like Ring of Honor, which heavily featured a style similar to the one Benoit helped to popularize. Initially, ROH pay-per-views garnered around 10,000 buys, which was phenomenal for a company whose only exposure was through word of mouth and the internet. However, with each passing pay-per-view, buys dropped, and after the 6-event deal was up, ROH chose not to renew it. I guess I'll stop it for there, and then we have
There's one more paragraph, but we can say that for the...
Yeah, I was going to say we could save that for after the last match of the review, yeah.
So first off, I want to say, Matt, great job as always. I do love that. One thing I love about Through the Years is by the time we're done, if people want to do editing, you will have a partial audio book of Matt reading maybe two chapters of Daniel Bryan's autobiography in a very soothing voice. So that's like a bonus you'll get at the end of this run of the podcast. But so I do want to talk about Benoit, but first, a couple things directly in the Danielson thing. Danielson kind of makes it sound like, he doesn't explicitly say that, but in that last part you read, he kind of makes it sound like that the Benoit thing hurt ROH pay-per-views. And Bryan, wrestlers aren't always right about things. They have poor memories. And we've pointed out, I think, once or twice before in the book, even though this is a pretty good and honest book, he has gotten a couple details wrong. And listeners should know this already from just following us, but the first pay-per-view, Respect Is Earned, even though it was already in the can, did not debut anywhere on pay-per-view until July 1st, which means the first pay-per-view came out after the Benoit murder. So there was no pay-per-view. It wasn't like the pay-per-views were humming along really popular, and then the Benoit thing harshed everyone's buzz. The first pay-per-view actually debuted at like the worst time, like just a week or so, a little over a week, in the shadow of the Benoit thing. So if Brian's kind of implying that's not how it happened, it is interesting that he actually gave a number for the pay-per-views. All I know is I don't have the quote for this for this show, but I think I scanned over it when I was doing advanced research for like 2008, where Dave said like the second ROH pay-per-view, which would be this one, did better than the first, and then the third one did somewhere in between the other two. But it's an interesting metric to get there. And yeah, I'll talk a little bit more, I think, about the quote you'll read later. But yeah, so talking about Chris Benoit, it's funny because that you said something earlier that I was thinking myself. I was like, how do we handle this? Because I was thinking most of our listeners are people who grew up in this era with us. Benoit, if you are of a similar age of us, is probably like the wrestling equivalent of like the Kennedy assassination or the moon landing, where not that's on that level of significance, but one of those moments where fans mostly will remember where they were when they heard about it because it was such a shocking, memorable thing. And so it was kind of like, well, how much do we even need to talk about Benoit? But then I thought, I do know we have some listeners that are like in their early to mid 20s. And I thought maybe it was one of those moments where I realized how old we are, where I was like, this happened in 2007, which means there are people that are 18 years old now that were literally not alive when this happened, which means there are people like well into their 20s, while they were technically alive for Benoit, they don't really have a personal connection to him and weren't really old enough to appreciate what it meant and how horrific it was.
Yes, that's true. I think. I mean, tell us, listeners, if I'm wrong about this, but I think everyone knows the story, even the youngsters. Maybe you don't know why we cared so much compared to other things, but yes, that's how I'd feel about it.
Yeah, so the only things I kind of want to say is I came up with like two things I thought would be like, yeah, because like you, I agree. I don't think we need to go over the Benoit thing. That's been mythologized and documented on even like, Dark Side of the Ring, all that stuff. Everyone, even if you didn't come up in that era, you've heard of that story. It's a huge, horrific story. But I was trying to think, if anyone ever listens to, hopefully people are going to be listening to this show, Matt, 30 years in the future. When the world is gone, it'll only be this left. But, and our younger listeners, I always thought, what do I want to express that I like personal expressions that I think maybe a younger person might not truly completely grasp from just reading Wikipedia and stuff, like what can we offer? And so I came up with a couple things. And so the first thing is, I don't think if you didn't grow up with it in the 90s, you can quite grasp the kind of love Benoit got from our circles, because nowadays there is still a bias for short, undersized wrestlers, but there's way less of a bias. In the 90s, there was a huge bias from the big two, WWF and WCW, for shorter wrestlers that weren't flashy, that didn't have a certain look, people that looked like Scott D'Amore. And how many times can we do it? Let's keep going. And so, those guys had a huge, really difficult brick wall. And so a lot of us hardcore fans that were into into a lot of wrestling, we love those guys even more. We champion them because those were the 90s was the days where guys like Kevin Nash would literally call those people vanilla midgets. And that was not a loving term. That was,
and he would say, he never said it on TV at the time. He said it behind the scenes to explain to the people in charge that you could never actually push these guys. They don't deserve it, and they're not capable.
Yeah, and so Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero and Dean Malenko, guys like that, we loved those guys because we thought they were the best wrestlers in the world. But there was also this feeling of like, this is the part like that the mainstream isn't, these are the underdogs in the industry. And Chris Benoit was, I would say, in some circles online, the most loved wrestler for a period of the night, and on the newsletters,
and into the 2000s.
Yeah, the most respected, the most loved from a technical, just critical standpoint, and so like when we saw him rise up through the kind of break some of those glass ceilings and, you know, become a major star in WCW and then even more so in WWF, you know, that was big. Like that was one of the reasons why so many of us celebrated WrestleMania 20, the end, because it was Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit ending the biggest wrestling promotion's biggest show of the year, you know, as the two world champions hugging each other. And it was a moment that didn't feel real, I think, to some of us.
It felt so validating at the time. Both Benoit doing his incredible like run at that year's Royal Rumble, which, you know, before it was tainted, I thought was like one of the first or second best Royal Rumble, period. And then the WrestleMania 20 moment, which, you know, it's again been very tainted, but at the time was one of the most satisfying moments I've ever watched in professional wrestling. It just in terms of like personal satisfaction for what I wanted out of wrestling, for what I thought was deserving of being promoted at the top of the biggest company in the world. Like it was just so validating to a certain kind of fan that I was one of. And yeah, it's very hard to explain now because there's much less of a gap between what the major promotions think of as deserving stars and what the quote hardcore audience think of as deserving stars.
Yeah. So that's a great way to say it, because I think that's the first of my 2 points, which is that's the one of the two things I think might be lost if you didn't grow up through it, which was it was more than just like your favorite great worker of today. It was like a symbol of something that we had watched struggle and break through a lot of barriers, like a whole subgroup of wrestlers. And the best way I could put like that WrestleMania 20 for me, it's kind of a weird comparison, but it reminds me of something in the movie Goodfellas, which, spoilers, if you haven't seen Goodfellas, a 35-year-old movie, I'm going to spoil it for you, part of it. But that movie is about the American Mafia, and Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci, and Ray Liotta play three friends in the Mafia. And there's a scene deep into the movie where Joe Pesci learns he is going to get made. And in the Mafia parlance, being made is like a promotion to a special level where you get special powers and privileges. It's not for everybody. And De Niro and Liotta are so happy for their friend, especially because to be made, you have to be 100% pure-blooded Irish. They have to be able to trace your roots back to the old country. And Liotta and De Niro's characters are only partially Italian, so they can never be made, and they know that. And so I think Liotta's character says something like, it's like we're all being made. Like seeing him, we were so happy because, you know, it was like a win for all of us. And then of course what happens is Joe Pesci's character isn't made. It was a ruse because the mob was in fact very unhappy with Joe Pesci's character, and they brutally murder him. And that's the start of just the last section of the movie where everything goes to shit. But to me, WrestleMania 20 was like we were seeing one of our own be made. Like we didn't want to be wrestlers, we couldn't be wrestlers, but it was like we spent years championing Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit and their contemporaries, and it was like our style won. You know, like it is finally getting national recognition. It can be at the top of the card, even if only for shorter periods of time, even if they still love the big and handsome guys and all that. And then to me, what happened almost very shortly after that was like learning, oh, Joe Pesci isn't getting made at all. He's getting murdered, because all of a sudden seeing Guerrero die and Benoit die and realizing how much of a cost there was to get those spots, the steroids, the way they push their bodies, all that stuff. It was like, it very much felt like one of the happiest moments a lot of us had as fans was WrestleMania 20, and very quickly it curdled in the most awful way. And
yeah,
again,
it made at least me, and I guess I wonder if the Joe vs. the World episode that I was on in the summer of 2007 is still available online, so you could hear me wrestling with all of this, no pun intended, like as it happened, just this idea of like, man, everything that I wanted was poison. Like I am the problem, you know, like this is like my perception of what's good, and it's almost like growing up thinking of yourself as like like a nerd, like kind of like an online nerdy guy, and like kind of seeing yourself as maybe like, you don't believe in that like macho aggression that all the jocks or whatever. And then you realize that these nerdy online people are resentful people who are currently in the process of ruining all discourse in the entire world. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and it's like, gosh, like what was I a part of? And like this false sense of maybe even like a little bit of superiority that I had. It's like, man, as self-deprecating as I am, like, there's a line from a band that I like, Titus Andronicus, in one of their songs says, to whatever extent you hate yourself, it isn't enough. I was like, man, I'm just the worst. And like, obviously, you shouldn't ever bring these things back to like some sort of self-centered analysis, but sometimes you think of how you fit into things, and that's what I was going through at the time. I was like, gosh, am I promoting a form of entertainment where I'm encouraging people to ruin their lives and the lives of their loved ones? And it was just a very, very, just like there was like a lot of existential crisis, I think, for both performers and for certain type of fan after all this happened, like just questioning everything that we thought was good about wrestling. It was just such a bizarre time.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, because I think that's a great transition to my other point of I was trying to think of two things that maybe fans that didn't grow up might not fully realize that we could offer. And I think the other thing is it dovetails beautifully into what you just said, which is I don't think unless you live through it, you could get the kind of dread that was in, like you said, like in the business and out of the business from the fans covering it for like a good month or two. And it lingered on for longer than that in different ways. But like it was not quite like an existential, dread where I don't think any of us thought wrestling, well, maybe someone did, that wrestling was going to die because of this.
I'm a catastrophizer. I don't think I thought wrestling was going to die, but I thought maybe it should.
Yeah. And there was a lot of people like that. And there was thoughts of, there was even brief talk that maybe the government was going to get involved in regulations. And there was I have someone that I listened to, Dave Meltzer, before podcast on audio. I listened to him when I was a young kid, snot-nosed teenage kid on IATA back when it was internet radio and not podcast, like in the late 90s.
Me too, sir. Although I will say it's mostly the 2000s, because I think that show started in like September or October of 99. But yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I remember, like, I'm saying that just saying Dave Meltzer has seen everything in wrestling. And I've listened to a lot of him talk. I have never heard him like I heard him in the month after that. For like a month, he was in like a fucking fugue state. He was just down. You could tell it was just killing him to have to keep covering this. Like, he did a good job of just living in this story and what this meant. And I think a lot of, so what we talked about earlier, it changed coverage of wrestling for a long time. And I also think, like Matt was saying, I think a lot of people had the thoughts of Matt, where there were people, I think, that stopped watching wrestling because of this. They were like, maybe I was already kind of feeling it was petering out post the Monday Night Wars. And you know what? This is a sign that I should get off the bus. I think I listened a few months ago, Rich from Voices of Wrestling gave an anecdote where he said he was one of those people where it was like, after the Benoit thing, he was like, I'm going to stop watching wrestling. But then he was like, okay, ROH I'm a fan of, and they're doing that Man Up show in Chicago. And he said that show kind of was like, okay, after I watched that, I'm still into wrestling. I can't turn my back. But I think a lot of fans had that. It was such a dark era. I think a lot of fans had that moment where if you didn't stop watching wrestling, you at least thought for a minute, should I stop watching wrestling? Like, is this business too ugly to support it?
And for me, that, he had Man Up. I had the Manhattan Mayhem too, with the Danielson versus Morishima match a couple months after this. But I don't think I certainly never got fully as back into WWE as I was before that. And I think my ROH fandom dipped a little bit too, even. Like, I still was into it and I still went, but by 2008, I wasn't traveling to shows anymore. I would go to shows in New York. I think watching the rise of Punk and Danielson in WWE helped me stay somewhat engaged in WWE. But I think it probably wasn't until AEW came around that I really felt like I got fully back into current American wrestling.
Yeah, and to be fair, I do think it forced some positive changes. I do think there is a more strict concussion protocol, although I'm sure people ignore it and find ways around it. Does seem to be less headshots, certainly with stuff like unprotected chair shots to the head. The reactions to those things are are different. Wrestlers seem to be dying less from steroids. I look at people on TV and definitely can tell there are still people using steroids, but either medical science is advanced or they've modulated their use enough that it doesn't seem like we're having the epidemic that we had during a period. So things have gotten better. Sometimes I worry that we're sliding back slowly a little bit, but things did change for the better because of the Benoit murders. Like, it was one of the rare tragedies that was so horrific. It did scare wrestling straight to a degree. Not enough, probably.
At least temporarily.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I think those are the two things if you didn't live through it, maybe we offered a little bit of just. And again, it will color through the years for the rest of its run, because you will, I'm sure, find review quotes we'll be reading or people more often now saying this was great except this spot. Because, yeah, I would say for years, a lot of us, anytime we saw a spot, even no matter what our opinions on those spots, like the blows to the head, it instantly bummed you out, because even though we all knew they were bad beforehand, now we had something that we instantly had in our heads of what's the worst possible case scenario would be, which is horrific. And, yeah, so finally we'll go to Bruce Mitchell had a column, and I'll read a little excerpt of it because he wrote. This is an example of the coverage that these matches would now get because of the Benoit stuff. So Bruce wrote about this match, Nigel versus Danielson. It may very well have been the match of this year. This was a tough, dramatic, athletic match, and make no mistake, in its way, it was a very real, very physical contest between two performers driven to cement their place in their part of the business. The match built to a climax at another point in the business might have cemented the two as working legends. Instead, the climax of the match and the show, Danielson and McGuinness cracking heads again and again until Danielson sprouted a blood bruise, was an ugly reminder of what has to change about this business. The Saturday night the show was taped, a series of spots like that between two of the best wrestlers in the world might still, even with the events of the last 3 months, be forgiven as the dedication of two artists whose passion drove them to this calculated sacrifice. Instead, Michael Benoit went on national television and spoke eloquently about the price he and doctors felt his son Chris paid for all the concussions he incurred in the course of his wrestling career. In that light, in light of Danielson's admitted own past history of multiple concussions, what would have once been an unforgettable series of incredible toughness became another disturbing ripple in the larger pool of defiance and corruption the wrestling business has become. There are encouraging reports, though, that some Ring of Honor wrestlers know what happened on the Driven show and are taking responsibility for changing things for the sake of their own health, researching blows to the head and concussions. Performers and management in Worked Pro Wrestling have a control over what they do that other athletes in combat sports can never have. These wrestlers are studying the risk-reward ratio of what they do to decide, simply put, there's no good reason for any wrestler ever again to put himself in a position where they will likely get a concussion by deliberately taking blows to the back of the head, headbutting each other, taking chair shots, or anything else that can injure the brain. There's also no reason for promotions or their commentators to put over these blows as acceptable or the ability to take them in the short term as signs of toughness. And yeah, I pretty much agree with that. And I will say something else.
Bruce Mitchell, for some reason, I guess certain things he said gets a bad rap. But I think that he provided something very valuable to wrestling journalism and discourse that we don't have enough of anymore. And I was always a fan of his, like, again, not perfect, but like a lot of his writing, I was always a fan of it. And this kind of stuff is why I think it was a very valuable thing to write.
Yeah, and one thing I'll mention that his thing reminded me of is one thing that changed, and we saw it a few times, not often, but a few times in Ring of Honor, but happened in all of wrestling, where they would sell, he had a concussion, he has a concussion as like a fun thing to, not like fun, but like, they were very willing to sell that as, isn't this wrestler tough? Like, this thing probably gave him a concussion, where after the Benoit deaths, that was done. You did not sell anymore. Oh, this wrestler could have a concussion. No one wanted to say that, because that would make you look irresponsible.
Of course, they brought it back eventually. But,
yes, but for a time,
yes.
It turned it off. So We go to the end of the show. After the match, we end the show on a couple minutes of in-ring celebration. The crowd goes nuts, and as a bloody Danielson shouts, "Who's the best in the world?" the crowd shouts, "You are," back at him multiple times. And Bryan comes off as a huge star here. Like, this is almost like equal to the Aries thing at the start, where Bryan just comes off as like the kingfish of fucking wrestling at this point. The crowd then chants for Nigel, chants "Thank you both," as Bryan offers Nigel a handshake, and he accepts it. Bryan's arm is raised by the referee as an on-screen graphic tells us to check your listings for Man Up in November. So, yeah, that was what a way to end the show. So before we're as always covering the DVD version, so we'll get to the DVD part. We're going to review the pay-per-view part first. But first, let's see what our friends all did for the pay-per-view, how they reviewed it. First, we'll go The Observer, as always, what they did for pay-per-views. They did a poll. So these were the results from like the readership poll of Driven. 163 people gave Driven a thumbs up. That's 97% of the vote. One person gave it thumbs down. 0.6% of the vote. There's always one person that gives these shows a thumbs down, like any good show. And 4 people gave it in the middle. That's 2.4%. So an overwhelmingly positive reaction.
Side note, is wrestling the only like review like situation where there's a concept of thumbs in the middle?
I think so. Wade Keller very briefly had an MMA website where he tried to do star ratings.
Yes,
for MMA,
I remember that.
And everyone mocked him, and it quickly got abandoned. But so best match poll, this is pretty predictable. Danielson versus Nigel got 134 votes. 11 people thought the opener, the 6-man, was the best match. 10 people thought Steen and Generico versus the Briscoes was. 8 people thought Claudio versus Seidel was the best match. Worst match, 60 people thought it was Albright and Pele. 27 people thought it was Morishima and Jimmy Rave. 8 people thought it was Marufuji and Whitmer. Dave wrote about this. We got well over double the response to the second pay-per-view as to the first. Even though TVN and the Dish Network claim millions of subscribers, we get virtually no response on ROH pay-per-view shows except after the in-demand airings a week later. The ROH product is going to appeal to a far greater percentage of people who are newsletter readers than of the public, so it getting response level above that of TNA and not all that far from what some WWE and UFC shows get isn't necessarily indicative of any real success, but probably is indicative that the second show did far better than the first. Some of that may be because people talked of Danielson versus Nigel McGuinness as a potential match of the year, and you simply aren't going to be able to have matches like that on every pay-per-view show. They still have the disadvantage that pay-per-view shows are months old, have no television backing, and little advertising. So this show did by all accounts appear to do better from a buy rate standpoint than the first. And it is interesting. That seems like only one provider that people give a shit about ordering the pay-per-views. And now we get into their sum ups of the whole show, the reviews. Dave starts with ROH's second pay-per-view begins airing this week. The second show, called ROH Driven, is a 7-match wrestling heavy show that ranks at the top of the pay-per-view shows held this year. The show featured 2 hot crowds, an interesting booking twist, a spectacular opening match, and an even better final match. Every character on the show comes across as somebody. And another strong point is that because of most of the wrestlers are small, since they are in with each other, they don't come across nearly that small in perspective. The hot, small crowd and the way it's shot again gave it an old ECW feel, although very few ECW shows were at this level. Of course, those shows were also live. We already have gone over the pros and cons of marketing ROH on pay-per-view, but the one thing is, after seeing the recent WWE and TNA television and pay-per-view offerings, it only took 5 minutes into the first match where you felt you were getting a product that blows away the big leagues of US wrestling. Whether new people will stumble on it and grow the business is a question. But for those who do see it, unless you are so indoctrinated into a different style that you can't accept new stuff, it'll be awfully hard not to like this show a lot. There were a few extremes that probably should be done away with. And then Danielson versus McGuinness build to the finish where they ran at each other like rams and bonked heads until Danielson bled gives you a different and more negative reaction to the spot today than it did in the building at the time it was taped. It has significantly better wrestling than TNA and minus the headache-inducing booking. Plus, guys are booked to get over as opposed to stay in their same positions forever. It doesn't have the big production atmosphere of WWE, but WWE is very hit and miss when it comes to connecting with its crowds. 90% of what was on this show hit, and the key angles and matches hit perfectly. So, Dave with a very enthusiastic review. Wade Keller writes, They stuck to what they do best and focused primarily on what they do well that others vying for pro wrestling fans' dollars don't do well. That's the best approach to take. The production values were good enough during the matches themselves to provide a window into the ring without distractions. The crowd enthusiasm more than made up for the lack of any other bells and whistles that fans may be accustomed to with major pro wrestling pay-per-views. It was a tight 2-hour showcase of the type of wrestling athleticism that just isn't being featured on a regular, dense enough basis by either of the big two, either on pay-per-view or TV or house shows for that matter. And then Brian Alvarez hyped in his own way, which he wrote, after a several week period of quite frankly fucking shitty wrestling, leave it to ROH to bring my love for the business back. Buy the ROH driven pay-per-view right now. Depending on where you live, the price ranges from $9.95 to $14.95 to $19.95. Poor suckers in Canada. If you can get it for the $9.95 price, it's a steal. Though to be honest, if you paid $39.95 for Unforgiven, it's a steal at $19.95 and would still be a steal at $39.95. Bryan Danielson versus Nigel McGuinness was better than Undertaker versus Mark Henry. No, swear to God it was. In fact, this whole show, top to bottom, will be in the running with some people for pay-per-view of the year. Now, granted, ROH is not for everybody. If you love 1980s Mid-South and hate just about everything else, well, there are tapes and DVDs of that stuff for you. But if you love athletic, hard-hitting, modern professional wrestling, if you love the X Division guys and it pisses you off how they're used in TNA, ROH is the promotion for you. There was nothing even approaching a bad match on the show. The closest we got was Jimmy Ray versus Takeshi Morishima, if only because the match itself was less than 4 minutes long, but even for a 4-minute match, it was totally fine. The opener was awesome, and the main event was one of the best matches of the year. I have a love-hate relationship with the Briscoes. He's back on this. I hate the way their matches are put together, but I'm not going to sit here and say that they are bad matches. They are, as noted elsewhere, as good as a match can get that makes absolutely no sense. If you're a Briscoes fan, you'll love it. And the main event featured two of the best scientific wrestlers in the world having a fantastic battle before some of the most rabid fans you'll ever see. Yes, there's a butting heads ramp spot that I could have done without, but I will at least give them the benefit of the doubt since the show was taped months back, long before the Chris Benoit head injury report came out. It's
short
not like
short before it happened, though.
Short before the merge, but the head injury report
yes,
is what his brain looks like. But
yes.
Brian continues, it's not like they're TNA who were fully aware of the report and then immediately booked a TV show where, for what ended up being absolutely no good reason whatever, since he was back, none the worse for wear the very next week, Messias waffled Abyss with unprotected chair shot after chair shot to the head. So apparently, Matt, there was still some people that did not learn the lesson of Benoit. So, Matt, that was their opinions. What did you think about the pay-per-view driven?
I thought it was pretty great. Just the crowd was so hot and the pacing was so good. I really loved the first two matches for what they were. I liked the tag title match of Good Deal. And the main event is one of my favorite matches in ROH history. And yes, it has that headbutt spot, but again, it's been, more than 18 years. Unfortunately, I'm less triggered by it than I was at the time. So I'm able to watch it and just analyze the aesthetic artfulness of the match, and maybe that's a flaw that I have as a person, but without thinking about the whole broader context of what they did to themselves, it just is an incredibly well worked and dramatic and exciting match. And to me, that makes this if this pay-per-view happened now, everyone would be thrilled with it. It's just such a well paced, hot crowd, good action. It provides something different. It comes across really well now. It addresses a lot of the flaws that we complain about on the more normal ROH DVDs. I would love to see just 2-hour pay-per-views like this today. It would be a breath of fresh air, and it was a breath of fresh air to watch it now.
Yeah, I agree. This was a great show. It was better than the first pay-per-view, which I thought was a very good show. But I think this show, obviously, it addressed two of the criticisms I had of that show, of Respect Concerned, even though I like that show. The first was, and we talked about in the coverage of that show, how Ring of Honor was kind of at that time wondering how to handle pay-per-views where they said early on they didn't want to give away. Their idea was they didn't want to give away matches that could sell DVDs. They wanted to make the pay-per-view seem as big as they could be without giving those matches away. They clearly had a change of heart for the second pay-per-view because that Nigel Danielson match could have sold DVDs, and they put it on pay-per-view. And so I thought that was a nice change. And the other thing was we talked about how that show a lot of those matches kind of felt disconnected. They didn't really feel like they had big storyline or emotional stakes, where this show felt more, if the whole show felt more like a big deal. Like you had not just big matches, but big angles. The Aries return was a big angle. The Seidel heel turn isn't the biggest angle in the world, but it is a notable chapter in that saga. The Danielson Nigel match had something on the line, and all that. It just felt like not just a better show, but a more important show where, it felt like a pay-per-view, like we expect wrestling pay-per-views to be, where it's not just a great show, but you're seeing important developments. And yeah, it was great. So now, as we did on the last show, we are going to go to the DVD. There was a bonus DVD if you bought the DVD version, a whole second disc that was just the stuff they taped for DVD. And an interesting wrinkle to this was last show, the Respect is Earned, the first pay-per-view, they taped everything kind of out of order from what we see it at, in the sense where, like, the matches that would be on the bonus disc were kind of sprinkled throughout the card, where this show, they taped the entire pay-per-view first. I think they changed the order of, like, Morishima and Wraith came after the Briscoes and Steen and Generico. But overall, they taped the entire pay-per-view first, other than the Philly match, obviously. And then they taped all the matches we're about to cover afterwards in order. So they kind of front load the show of the pay-per-view, probably to guarantee the hottest crowd for the pay-per-view portion. So now we get this little 4-match card that all happened in Chicago the same night. We start with the Minnesota Home Wrecking Crew of Lacey and Rain, scored to the ring by Jimmy Jacobs, defeating Daisy Hayes and Mischief in 8 minutes, 41 seconds, when Lacey pinned Mischief after what Dave Prazak on commentary calls a double-team tamakaze. It's basically an unprettier with elevated legs. I thought an interesting difference between this show and the first pay-per-view was what I talked about. It was that they kind of chunked it up differently, but also this match was pretty meh. It was a solid standard structure where most of the match was Daisy as face in peril and the Home Wrecking Crew doing ref distraction heel double teams. I would describe some of the work in this match as not botchy, but not particularly clean either. I did like that Jimmy blew smoke in a wrestler's eyes again tonight, but this time Daisy just didn't sell it at all. She just made the choice. I'm not even going to sell the smoke bugs. In fact, I'm going to go after Jimmy right after he does it. Mischief throws a really nice clothesline. I really have nothing to say about this. I swear to God, this isn't even me trying to rush because we're going to have a little bit of a longer show. This is literally, I've rarely had a match recently where I just have nothing to say about this. This is a basic 8-minute tag that was adequately done that I'd give a low average to. It is, a division that is normally not given much of a shot opportunity, and this was not one of their better nights even with the very limited opportunity they did get.
Yeah, I would say it was more ambitious than most ROH women's matches because it did have like a pretty basic structure where the Minnesota Home Wrecking Crew they do a pretty good job cutting off the ring against Hayes. The mat work that Rain and Hayes do is like a little sloppy but entertaining. Eventually, when Mischief gets the hot tag, it's not the hottest hot tag ever, but she does some okay spots like the body scissors into the leg grapevine on Rain and a pretty crazy submission hold with Mischief, like pulling up like Lacey's arms and legs while Hayes locks in a camel clutch on Rain. That stuff, it's fine, but like this, like the execution wasn't exactly clean.
Yeah.
But it wasn't bad. The structure was decent. I did think it was funny when the Minnesota Home Wrecking Crew do a double team unprettier and Prazak calls it a tamakaze, which I guess wasn't that because Tommy Rogers used that move and that's why it was called the tamakaze, or was that just what it was called before he used it and just happened to be named Tommy? Is that a Japanese name? I don't know.
I think that's probably just he's going to the earlier cut there,
to the ECW name of the move. But
like the occasional person that would call the Death LA driver a Spicoli driver. Some people just stick with certain versions.
Yeah, I wonder if that was like a Gabe call. Like, this is ECW, I'm an ECW guy, you call it the ECW name. I don't know. But anyway, yeah, sloppy, kind of decently structured, not bad. It was all right, I guess.
I also want to say here, these DVD versions of the ROH pay-per-views are really jarring because they show the pay-per-view exactly how it aired on pay-per-view. So you watch this 2-hour show full of very tight pre and post-match cuts that are there so they can squeeze as much stuff as possible into the 2-hour pay-per-view. And then you get to the DVD exclusive stuff and it's ROH's normal editing where you see every second between when someone comes out to the ring and goes back through the curtain at the end. So it comes from like the very tightest pacing to a very relaxed pacing, and when you're watching all over the course of a couple nights or whatever, you're like, whoa, this is kind of jarring.
And you also notice the difference in the effort that the announcers put in.
Yeah. That brings us to Nigel McGuinness defeating Chris Hero with Bobby Dempsey, Larry Sweeney, and Tank Tolan via pinfall in 18 minutes, 23 seconds after hitting the Tower of London. This is a 4-match DVD exclusive part. This is definitely the first of 2 matches that, at least in the amount of time given, is far meatier than anything they gave on the pay-per-view, DVD exclusive matches on the first pay-per-view. But how do you think it turned out as an actual match?
Well, I liked it more than the match that they had at Supercard of Honor 2 with all the, what's his face? The, Johnny Fairplay bullshit,
Yeah.
you know? But it was still a little disappointing. The early part of the match, Leonard was like, this should be a great wrestling match between 2 accomplished technical wrestlers. But of course, you have that whole peanut gallery outside, with Bobby Dempsey doing jumping jacks, and it's entertaining. And of course, Hero is doing his wacky over the top flips. And as you coined them, deep knee lunges instead of wrestling, and the crowd pops huge for it, giving Hero almost a babyface reaction. So, I don't know if that was what he was going for. And then Nigel does his own wacky springboard flipping off the top rope and hitting an elbow to the side of Hero's head. And I was like, that was almost a Hero homage. There's also a part where Nigel does that headstand in the corner and he turns it into an O'Connor roll, which I don't think we've seen that one before. I like that. And then Hero does a headstand of his own, and Nigel just pushes him all the way over the ropes onto all of Sweet and Sour Incorporated. And I did like that. I thought that was one of the most fun spots of the match. And then the technical portion of the match goes on hiatus. They fight on the outside. Tolan pushes Dempsey into McGuinness. McGuinness is chasing Dempsey around the ring, right? All that stuff. And then they go back in the ring. Nigel's working over Hero's arm. Hero locks in an old school Boston Crab. And at this point, the match is pretty slow. But eventually, Nigel starts to no-sell Hero's chops, and then there's a spot where Hero tries to block an uppercut, so Nigel spins into a lariat, which I think is the exact same spot he did in the Danielson match we just reviewed. Back outside, we see Dempsey, his pants keep falling down. I'm like, is that a sign that this training is working? They get into a Nigel comeback, but it's still really slow. Nigel starts hitting lariats. Eventually, we see Tank yelling at Turner, Paul Turner, the ref, after a 2 count. He says, "If you had better muscle tone, you'd have counted faster," which I thought was pretty funny. We get the spot where Nigel does the ole ole uppercut again on the floor to Hero, and then we get Hero is locking in the dragon clutch, the hangman's clutch, and the crowd is reacting pretty good at this point. They start to wake up a little bit. Nigel gets to the ropes, and then Hero tries headbutting Nigel, but Nigel comes back aggressively, goes for the jawbreaker lariat. But as he goes into the ropes, Tolan and Dempsey pull him to the outside, and then Castagnoli comes out, chases Sweeney and the whole gang away. So now we have the 2 of them one-on-one. And McGuinness hits the lariat, Tower of London. So I was expecting after Sweet and Sour Inc. were driven away that they would have a more serious sequence against each other. But oh well, I did like the finishing sequence. But I thought there were pretty dull parts in the match, so I thought it was pretty disappointing overall. As a lot of Hero's recent ROH singles matches have been, the shtick just sometimes overwhelms the match. And it wasn't bad. It was certainly after what we just saw from Nigel and from what we saw from him the night before, it almost felt a little bit like a night off for him, which, fair enough. But as a match itself, I didn't think it was so fantastic.
I liked this match. I did not love it, but I definitely liked it more than you. First thing I want to mention is, since it's not the pay-per-view, another thing that gets weird when you watch the DVD version, you watch the pay-per-view and the non-pay-per-view parts, back to back. Nigel, during the pay-per-view, gets a very generic theme. Now that's on the DVD, he comes out to Oasis like he normally does. And there is this really weird cut. Did you notice this, Matt? There's this really weird cut pre-match where Nigel's in the ring walking towards Hero, who's in the opposite corner of the ring. And then we get a zoom in that turns into a cut to what must not be that long afterwards, because the match still hasn't started yet, except Nigel and Hero are now both in different corners of the ring, and Nigel has this big smile on his face. I was like, that's a really strangely obvious cut for ROH. What is it? I did some research, found out what it was, and it is an example of how things changed after Benoit, because okay, this is from an anonymous PW Torch Live report. This person wrote, pre-match was a lot of fun. The crowd once again was giving Toland, "You take steroids" chants. Hero was furious and makes Bobby Cruz announce that, for the record, Chris Hero and Bobby Dempsey have never taken steroids. So that is completely cut from the DVD, and I have to imagine that is only because of the Benoit stuff. That is them not wanting to be associated with steroids at all, and they just excised the whole thing with a really obvious cut. And I think they would have allowed that before this. So for people wondering, like, was Gabe serious when he was telling Bryan in that book excerpt that I wish we never aired Danielson versus Nigel after the Benoit thing? I don't know if he was serious about that, but he definitely, I think, was more strict about stuff like that showing up on pay-per-view post-Benoit. So I'm a fan of hero shtick in this era, but I like you, Matt, can acknowledge that sometimes it can kind of swallow a match whole and prevent it from going in maybe some more interesting possible directions. And this match has a lot of hero shtick, but while it wasn't some 4-star banger to me, it did kind of work for me on this night. There's a moment early you talked about where Hero celebrates by doing one of his first moves of the match, and then he does not just the deep knee lunges, but basically every flip he ever does at a point during the match, he does them all in the row. And it's so ridiculous that not only does the crowd applaud him, Nigel applauds him. And yeah, like it's so goofy, you almost can't deny it. And there's a thing in this era of hero matches that can sometimes work, that can happen, doesn't always happen, and it sometimes works and it sometimes doesn't. And sometimes you get this crazy contrast between how cartoonishly Hero was working and how serious his opponent is working. When I was a kid, there was a comic book called Archie Meets the Punisher, and it just felt wrong. Like those are two worlds that shouldn't cross over. This match at points kind of felt like Archie Meets the Punisher, but in a good way, where Nigel hits a hard kick or stiff lariat, and it seems way more impactful because Hero's offense just feels like it's from another world at points. He's so much goofier. Everything else, his selling. And it kind of worked for this match because Hero takes a lot of this match, but you could almost buy it because it almost feels like the way they're working that like one move of Nigel's is equal in an impact to 20 from Chris Hero, because they're just different levels of seriousness. And then I also thought one thing interesting in this match was Nigel goes for the headstand multiple times, and Hero, I felt like, not only avoided it every time, Nigel never successfully hits it here. Hero avoids it a different way all 3 times. Like one time he ducks under it, one time he drop kicks Nigel when he's upside down. And in something you mentioned this, I don't know if I've seen anyone do, well, I don't know if you mentioned this. You mentioned the thing coming up. I'll mention in a sec, but like there's something I don't know if I've ever seen someone do before. One time Hero just simply refuses to engage with Nigel doing the headstand. He just walks away, and then Nigel just, okay, fine. And it's a spot that almost ruins the headstand spot, because you start to wonder, well, why doesn't everyone just do that? Why doesn't everyone just be like, I'm not even going to get involved with this. I'm just going to walk over here until you give up. But it does create what I thought was one of the coolest spots of the match. And this is what you mentioned, where Nigel, where Hero tries to headstand, it takes him 2 tries because he's Chris Hero, and that's part of the joke. And Nigel then shoves him off the turnbuckle in the headstand to the floor onto Bobby Dempsey. I thought that was a pretty wild spot, and I thought put over Hero's character of, he's this guy who's desperate to do every impressive, athletic, flippy, or crazy thing that every other wrestler can do, and he can't do them quite as well, and he gets caught. And then we get a few little comedy moments from Hero and his whack pack, like some that I thought were genuinely funny in this match. Like at one point when he gets kicked in the back by Nigel, Hero just goes, "Son of a B," and he doesn't say bitch. And I thought that self-censoring was really funny to me. The the part you mentioned where Tank tells Paul Turner, the ref, you could count faster if you had better muscle tone. I thought that was funny. And that seemed to genuinely tickle Lenny Leonard on commentary. He seemed to get a real kick out of it. And there's also a moment I like where they cut to the Sweet and Sour Incorporated on the floor, and Hero was hurt, and you see Sweeney, and he tells Bobby Dempsey, quote, "Do some squats to make me feel better." I like you doing some squats is going to make me happy. So I thought that was funny. And then we get the interference you talked about near the end, and then Claudio runs out from the back and chases them away to even the odds. And it's funny that Dave Prezak says Claudio just neutralized Sweet and Sour Incorporated, because obviously Claudio years later will have a move called the Neutralizer. So overall, this match was more focused on the Hero character than a pulse-pounding, like, big chunk of action. But to me, Hero did enough here that the shtick hit enough on this night to me where I was like, this was good. This was like 3.25 to a low 3.5. And you did get a couple cool spots with like the headstand bump and things like that. And also Nigel does this enziguri to Hero's back, which I don't know if it was on purpose or not, but it actually looked legitimately cool. And, yeah, so all of that stuff. After the match, Dave Prezak on commentary says Nigel has pinned Morishima Hero in the same weekend and has great momentum heading into his world title shot in Tokyo. And once again, pretty weird that we're talking about the great momentum he has. If you watch this whole thing on DVD, you saw 2 matches earlier him lose a big match. But
as I said, there's 3 continuities in ROH now. There used to be 2, now there's 3. There was the live event following on the website continuity and the DVD continuity. And now we have added the pay-per-view continuity, and all 3 have to coexist somehow. And it must have made Gabe Sapolsky's life a living hell.
Yeah, and after the match, ref Paul Turner and an early appearance of future ROH interviewer Kyle Durden try and help Hero to the back as the crowd chants, "Fuck you, Hero." And in another moment that made me chuckle, Hero says he's okay, I'm okay to walk on my own. He gets away from Durden and Turner. He takes one step, he collapses, and he needs their help again. I thought, okay, that's a good bit. Adam Pearce and Shane Hagedorn come out to the ring. Pearce immediately gets a few Repo Man chants. Pearce gets on the mic and says if he hears another person chant Repo Man, which of course immediately draws way more Repo Man chants, it's what he wants. In a moment that made me pretty uncomfortable, and maybe I don't have full context for this, so I'll be open to that possibility, but Pearce points out, there's a bunch of fans heckling him. Pearce points out one black fan that's heckling him and calls him both Reggie Bush and Pac-Man Jones before telling him, "Why don't you make it rain?" more on referencing Pac-Man Jones.
I know, it's just like, okay, like he's just like, let me just be like completely uncreatively racist. That's the new thing he's doing. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, and it's also weird knowing that Pac-Man Jones gets used by TNA playing off like this infamous nightclub thing where people got shot and a guy got paralyzed. And so between this and like the unprotected chair shots Brian was talking about or Dave was talking, whatever, in their review of the show, Matt, was TNA the first anti-woke promotion? Because it seemed like they were just ignoring what everyone else was like, this is too disgusting.
I don't know, man. I feel like Mid-South had some moments too.
I guess technically every wrestling promotion.
All wrestling in the 70s and 80s and 90s and
every promotion
2000s, most of them in the 2010s. At least, probably the biggest one in the world in the 2020. You know what I'm saying?
Thank you, Matt, for gently making all of us realize that I just asked the dumbest question, even as a joke. Yeah,
but I am, you are controlling your narrative, and that's really what's important.
I will say this fan, he seemed to take what I would describe as an uncomfortable jive from Adam Pearce in stride and flipped him off and seemed to laugh and chuckle. A fan throws a streamer in the ring to mock Pearce as Pearce says, this is his hometown. And the last time I was here, I had the extreme honor of ridding that piece of crap Colt Cabana from this city forever. He said even after the match, Colt gave him the respect he deserved, and Colt said he wanted to grow up to be just like Adam Pearce. You people booed me. Rather than accept that I'm an instrumental to every great Chicago wrestler's career, you fans are more interested in chanting Repo Man. Pearce says tomorrow's his 29th birthday, and that means he's lived in this city that long, but that ends today because Chicago is no longer his hometown. This gets a big pop and a joyous round of applause. Pearce has to be given some chump to beat on, and out comes Takeshi Morishima. Fans chant, you fucked up. They chant for Morishima, and we get an impromptu match ROH World Champion Takeshi Morishima successfully defends the title for the second time this night, defeating Adam Pearce, scored to ring by Shane Hagedorn, via pinfall in 5 minutes, 25 seconds after he hit the backdrop driver. This was weird. At first, I almost felt like this should have been the Morishima match they showed on the pay-per-view, because by the nature of Morishima being a surprise opponent for Pearce, and Pearce setting it up so well by healing on the crowd, Morishima got an even better, cooler reaction here than I think he got for the Rave match, where people are like, oh, I can't wait to see him kick this asshole's ass now. But then the bell rings, and Pearce gets, I would say, over half this match. Like, Morishima dominates the start, and he destroys Pearce at the end, but the middle is like all Pearce as he hits a bunch of eye pokes, and you just get a bunch of Morishima selling them as Pearce does shtick. Pearce does uncork a spinning leg lariat that I thought was nice, and he pulls out his nice top rope leg drop, which is always a pretty cool move. But then he also does, which we talked about earlier, he pulls out the Repo Man mask and puts it on, which is, once again, like I said earlier, his character is in such a weird place between the serious promos and still doing the most shtick in the company at this point. And also, one other thing I want to nitpick about, Pearce suplexes Morishima in this match, and while that was impressive, I don't think somewhat comedic ass-showing heel Adam Pearce should be a wrestler that gets to toss around Morishima in any way. Like, that should be saved for higher-ranking wrestlers at this point. So, overall, I'd call this weird. I wonder why Gabe had Morishima do 2 squashes in one night in Chicago. Maybe he wanted to have options for which one would look better and then use that one for the pay-per-view.
But that doesn't make sense, because, like you said, he taped the pay-per-view in order, you know?
Yeah, but maybe he thought if that match doesn't turn out that good, then I can have a second one. But if that, you know what, whatever the case, I would say it was the right choice to use the Rave one, because I thought that was a better match by the finish for Morishima to show him off. So, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I was going to say, Pearce certainly did seem more credible against Morishima, which is weird, given that you're right, he did a lot of shtick. Well, first of all, the thing that I noted was on the Pearce promo at the beginning, when he says that tomorrow was his 29th birthday, I watched this guy and I'm like, this fucking guy was 13 years younger than I am now. Like, it's just like very upsetting, because he does not seem like a young man. You know what I mean? Like,
he's got a bit of the Arn Anderson bald thing where he looks, in late 30s, early 40s when he's 28, and he probably will look that way when he's 55.
Right. He looks exactly the same now as he did then, right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Which, and the older he gets, he ages like fine wine. He's a television superstar now. Yeah, I mean, I don't really have much to add about the match other than, I think it was arguably more substantial than the Rave match. But yes, not as dynamic or fun. I do think it was fun when Pearce hit a Lightning Kids style back heel kick. Like that was surprising. But yeah, the all the shtick, all the Repo Man stuff. It's weird that he's like begging the crowd to chant Repo Man at him. I don't really understand that. Like, he doesn't need to do that. But whatever, I guess it just makes the match seem like a joke, and whatever. Like I said, whatever. I guess that's my response to this match. It's kind of a whatever match.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't work from a kayfabe standpoint of when you get so mad about the crowd chanting Repo Man, and now in multiple matches you've gone out of your way to put on the mask. And like, he brought the mask with him, so he anticipated it happening. So how bad can you get? Like, it is a weird thing. But Hagedorn attacks Morishima immediately after the finish, and Morishima levels him with an ass attack before saying one more time in English to the crowd and hitting Shane with a backdrop driver. Morishima covers Hagedorn and has the ref count 3 for that. So I guess technically Morishima got 3 wins on this night. But that brings us to the main event. That was Kenta defeated Bryan Danielson via pinfall in 25 minutes, 33 seconds after hitting the go to sleep. One thing we talked about on Respect Is Earned, Matt, is how that show, the extra hour on the DVD wasn't bad, but it was incredibly inessential. You'd only need to watch that if you were a completist. You could just watch the pay-per-view, you'd fine. And this was another interesting change of strategy from the first pay-per-view to the second, where this is a match that you could only get if you bought the DVD version. And this, in theory, I would imagine they were hoping that this would encourage people to double dip. That if you're a person that wants to see the show as soon as possible, you buy the pay-per-view and you go, well, maybe I don't need to watch the extra hour and I think 20 minutes was this DVD. But like, if there's a match that might make you want to buy the DVD again, the show again, it's the second ever Kenta versus Danielson match. How'd you think it lived up to the hype and, the first one and all of that?
I was fascinated to watch it because I didn't get a chance to rewatch it for the Danielson special. I don't know. Did you?
No, you know what's weird? Because I knew that I only had limited time to watch a bunch of matches. I had to prioritize some. So I ended up watching their final match, which is in 2008 in Noah. But I actually thought, well, since I can't watch everything again, I'm going to save this for this episode. So actually, I'm in the same boat as you.
Yeah, and I know that Alan Cunahan said this was better than the first one. I'm pretty sure he said that, if I recall correctly. Maybe I'm mistaken. Alan, you could let me know when you finally get up to this episode in a couple of years. But the I remembered it having some real dynamic moments. And I would say watching it back, I do not think it was better than the first one. But there were sequences in the match that I think were as good as any of these matches. Like as good as any of the McGuinness matches, as good as any of the original Kenta versus Danielson match. I think there were some incredible sequences. I really still love this version of Danielson. He was the same Danielson that he was in the McGuinness match, just all business, super intense. This match was a lot more striking heavy than in the first match. Like it was all about like just Danielson grinding away at all of Kenta's limbs in crazy ways and then having strike battles. And, Kenta actually got on the mat a little bit more than he did in the first match. I think what this match didn't have at the first match had was this real big sense of importance and just this incredible like building crowd reaction. I don't think the crowd was exhausted, I think. And they were good for this match, don't get me wrong, but they never got to that like peak level of heat that the best matches that we've watched have had. I'd say considering that, they did a great job getting the crowd into it and stuff. I liked how Danielson kept withholding I have till 5 when he would break, and then finally got a big crowd pop when he did it near the end of the match when he locked in cattle mutilation. But yeah, as far as some of like the sequences that I loved, a lot of it has to do with like some of those strike battles. Like there's a spot where they fight on the apron and Danielson hits a belly to belly to the floor, which from the apron, which you usually don't see. There's a spot where they do a roll up and they trade suplexes with Danielson hitting belly to bellies and Kenta hitting belly to backs. There's a spot where they stand up and they start their like a really like big slap exchange, which we'll talk about after the match, but like they start slapping the crap out of each other, which Kenta seems to win, but then Danielson catches his leg and just repeatedly forearms Kenta, but Kenta hits a Basaiku knee out of nowhere, which I just thought was this incredible sequence that a less tired crowd would have gone insane, but I think this just gets like a good and solid reaction. There's a spot where Kenta blocks a roaring elbow, turns it into a crucifix, and then from that position transitions into cattle mutilation. There's a spot where Kenta goes for a sunset flip, and this spot was almost so sloppy that I liked it. Like Kenta goes for a sunset flip, but on Danielson off the top, but almost falls out of the ring, like falls out of the ropes. But he like corrects himself and goes for a buckle bomb, but he throws Danielson into the side of the ropes, like he misaims, and then falls outside himself. Like that was so like just like messy and balls to the wall crazy that I'd almost made it better for me. Then back in the ring, we get a spot where Danielson, Kenta hits a knee to Danielson's back, goes for the Busaiku, but Danielson catches him, rolls him up for a near fall. Then Kenta immediately transitions into a choke, but Danielson fights to his feet, lifts Kenta up, and hits his own go to sleep. But Kenta, like he barely sells it. He just starts slapping Danielson, locks in cattle mutilation, but Danielson escapes and starts hitting the elbow, and then Kenta stands up. Danielson hits a roaring elbow, hits the ropes. Kenta lifts him into a go to sleep. Danielson blocks that and grabs Kenta's leg, hits a tiger suplex, but holds on into cattle mutilation, which Kenta tries to reverse. And then Danielson goes back to the elbows, but Danielson keeps elbowing Kenta, but Kenta stands up, hits the go to sleep, and gets the win. I love some of those striking sequences. I love that finish. I love the way that Kenta hits the go to sleep. I don't think it had the full consistency in overall storytelling in the first match or the crowd reactions. So I don't think it was better, but there were elements that were. I think the intensity was better and the strikes were better. I think there were more creative sequences and I liked the callbacks. So I thought this was a really great match. I don't think it was as good as the McGuinness match. Just wasn't as tight, but like a great match that is well worth going out of your way to watch.
I completely agree. You made a lot of the points I'd want to make. Yeah, I am completely with you on this one. So again, apologies to Alan for maybe not liking as much as him. I will say I saw at least one or two other people that were anticipating this episode because they remembered this match being amazing and they were excited to hear us talk about it. And I want to stress, I think both of us think this match is great, but I am completely on board with your take of, I completely agree of, it's not as good as the first and it's not as good as Nigel and Danielson on the same show or same DVD, not the same show. But first I want to say, when Danielson gets in the ring, there's this face-off he has with Kenta where the house lights are off, but a spotlight is on them, and it's shining so bright on Kenta that you can't see his features. And it's so badass. I think it's unintentionally one of the coolest shots we've ever seen on Ring of Honor on through the years. It looks like Bryan is about to fight an angel. It is so fucking, I think it's got to be the image for the show. It looks so cool. And even before the match, it is so intense. Like Danielson's, posing around the ring, and Kenta just keeps turning to stare at Danielson wherever he goes. It is so effing intense. So this is the second and final Kenta versus Danielson match in ROH, and it's their third of 4 singles matches the two will ever have anywhere. Although I guess while they're alive, there's still hope. But they had the first at Glory by Honor 5, Night 2, which we have watched and covered. Months later in 2006, Danielson rematched Kenta in Noah. And then they have this match here in the middle of 2007. And then in 2008, they have their final match in Noah where Danielson drops Noah's GHC junior heavyweight title to Kenta. And that match is really good. I rewatched that in the last year. That match is very good, actually. So, and interestingly enough, actually, Danielson won the first. He then loses the next 3 to Kenta. So Kenta has the series. So again, yeah, the question people would probably be asking going into this was, do I like this as much as the Glory by Honor 5 match? And no. But it is great. To me, the Glory by Honor match was a 2006 ROH Match of the Year contender, and that is a year stacked with great matches. This to me is one notch below. This is maybe crossing over to 4.25 stars. And again, I'm a hard marker. The differences to me are like, well, first the atmosphere, like you said, Matt, the crowd here in Chicago, they're great as they had been the whole show. But that first Danielson Kenta match in New York had so much more in the way of stakes. Like you said, I think that was a great point you made. That match, it was the first time those two had ever had a singles match against each other. And it was they really built up to that whole year with a big push for Kenta as a semi-regular in ROH that year, being really dominant. It was for the world title. It was Danielson right after he suffered this serious shoulder injury against Colt Cabana, where we're fans, like, we weren't just worried about how well Danielson would be able to wrestle. We were worried if that match was even going to take place or get postponed or canceled. And, that match had all these intangibles going for it that really heightened the atmosphere. This match has none of those. It's just the match. And I would also put this match, like I said, a little below Danielson and Nigel from the pay-per-view because I felt that match had more nuance. I keep saying nuance this show. It's the word of the day other than Scott D'Amore, and more of a really distinct vibe where this match was a bit more generic. This match had good pacing. They did a good job of ramping it over time until they're trading bombs at the end. But I felt like the appeal to this match was more in the big bombs and the big spots in a kind of disconnected way where Nigel and Bryan, I really enjoyed how that match felt, not just what they did, but the whole vibe of it. It wasn't just a bunch of individual spots. It felt like it was building to a certain point. And I realize I'm nitpicking a match I'm saying is great quite a bit, but I'm doing that because I want to distinguish a great match like this from a match that I think is one notch higher, that is special or approaching special. Like, when I look back at some of my favorite ROH matches, they often have this feeling of capturing some kind of lightning in a bottle, like them finding a special magic that specific night. You look at something like Homicide versus Steve Corino at Bitter Friends, Stiffer Enemies. Those two guys had matches before that match. They had matches after that one. And all those other matches, they range from pretty damn good to pretty damn disappointing. Nothing felt like that match they had that night. They captured something that one night that they could never recreate. Kenta versus Danielson at Glory by Honor, I feel like had a little bit of that. This match here it doesn't feel like a special night where everything clicked. It feels like two of the most talented wrestlers in the world having a great match, but probably one they could get close to or match 6 to 8 times out of 10. And they wrestle this match pretty even back and forth. There are some, a lot of great moments. Danielson, I love that he does like the sitting dragon sleeper where he has Kenta's arms pinned behind his own back with his legs. I thought Danielson did this amazing sell of a kick to his arm where he looks like he's going to cry. You mentioned the belly to belly suplex off the apron to the floor. There's an open hand slap exchange that has some real consequences for Bryan that we'll get to in a minute. They also do these steal each other's finisher spots here with, Kenta does the cow mutilation multiple times. He even transitions one of them into a tiger suplex like Danielson sometimes does. And I will say, my personal feeling is the we steal each other's finisher spot has been done so often in wrestling that I can be grumpy about it. I think I have a lower tolerance for it than most people. But Danielson hits a go to sleep in this match that isn't just great. I think it's better than some of the ones Kenta hits. It is fucking beautiful. He hits it so well here, and almost annoyingly, Kenta barely sells it and comes right back. Although sometimes I feel like it's okay to no-sell your own finisher because it's almost like, one, you're overcoming the indignity of it, and two, maybe you know how to take it better than anyone else because you invented it. Who knows? I agree with you that Danielson did maybe his best job ever of milking the I have till 5 spot, because at this point it became so well known and popular. Fans expected it and wanted it every night. And so what Danielson would normally do is he would early on at one point in the match do a submission with a rope break, and he wouldn't say I have till 5 ref, and he'd let the crowd say it. And then late in the match, he'd do it a second time and then say it. And this time he doesn't do it but teases it like 2 or 3 times to the point where eventually the fans start booing him because he's not giving them what they want. And then when they finally do it, they go fucking insane, which again, it's another great example on this night of just teasing things. You get so much out of the same spot if you just tease it a few times and really make the fans long for it. So I thought this was a great match. It's a testament to how great these two are and how good ROH's best matches are, where I can spend half my review of this match talking about why it doesn't hit that special level, because a lot of wrestlers and a lot of promotions would be overjoyed to have a match of this level. Other than that one spot you mentioned, which is the insane Kenta spot where he nearly falls over the ropes trying to do a power bomb, and then he does do the power bomb, but he's so off, he misthrows Danielson to the side, and then he has so much momentum, he flies through the ropes to the floor, he can't stop himself. It's one of the very rare moments where Kenta, who normally has such good execution, is just completely, there's no other word for it, discombobulated. He's just so out of it for a whole sequence. It is interesting, but the work in this match, they build to some really good stuff at the end, and it's just that hard, crisp work for the most part that you expect from these two guys. It's hard for me to really, I don't want this to be a Wade Keller 2 3/4 star review where I make all those nitpicks and don't say enough about the good stuff. But a lot of the good stuff here, it is stuff that is in the first match. It's just that match had a lot of extra things going for it. And I feel it was just more special. It was a special night. But after the finish, we get 4 minutes of post-match. The fans chant match of the year rather than great, but not quite as good as their last match, which is what I would have been chanting if I was in the crowd. A little unwieldy, but I would have tried. On commentary, Prazak plugs ROH's next 2 shows in Japan as the crowd chants, "Thank you, Kenta." Kenta helps Danielson up, and the two shake hands before Kenta raises Danielson's arm. So again, Danielson being friendly here. Bryan actually bows to Kenta, who returns the favor. Bryan leaves to let Kenta stand alone in the ring to soak up some "please come back" chants. And then the camera follows Kenta all the way back through the curtain to a backstage area so poorly lit that we can barely see, where Kenta sits down and takes off his ring tape as we can hear Bobby Cruz in the ring plug the next Chicago show to the live crowd. So kind of a very lo-fi way to end the show. That's how the show ends. Matt, what is the Matt F trophy? Who wins that for the entire show? Everything. We're going the whole shebang here. Who gets the Matt F trophy?
How weird would it be if I didn't give it to Bryan Danielson after 2 of the best matches we've watched in 2007 on the same DVD set, right? That's pretty, this is a Bryan Danielson fan's dream, this show. Just 2 phenomenal matches. He was just incredible in both of them. I love this version of Danielson. It's maybe my favorite version. So, Easy pick this time.
If we ever kept track of the number of Manaf trophies, I would love the idea that we gave them all physical trophies, and then by the end of the show, Danielson would probably have like 30 trophies. Yes. Probably not that many, but he will have. This is not his first time winning it. I dare say, Matt, I am going to predict it will not be his last time winning it.
And by the way, there is one thing that I promised I would read before we wrapped up.
Oh, I forgot. Yeah, that's of course. Thank you, Matt.
It's short though. It's one paragraph.
Yes.
So this is
just
right after
Danielson's book.
Yeah, right after what I just read earlier. It says, the paradigm of how we should be wrestling was shifting. Some people accept new paradigms quickly. In this instance, I was not one of them. Despite all the concussion awareness and my own acknowledgement of certain dangers, I refused to tone it down. I stopped the aggressive headbutting, but I kept everything else about my in-ring performance the same. In mid-2007, I ruptured my left eardrum during a wild open-palmed exchange with Kenta in which one errant shot caught me in my left ear. I never got it fixed, and even now I don't hear well on my left side. Later in the year, I detached my retina in another example of my own stupidity, and that is, of course, to be continued in the future of Through the Years.
Yeah, and Bryan's book, one of the things that's great about it, that's fascinating, is how honest he is at some points in ways that are kind of dark. Like the end of the book, where he gives this postscript after writing most of the book with, his help or whatever, where he talks about how his dad passed away, and he was like, it's made me think that this wasn't worth it. He ends his biography by basically saying, my dad's death has made me realize all the time I spent away from him for wrestling didn't make it worth it, but I still have to keep wrestling because it's all I have. Like, that's an unbelievably dark ending to a biography. And this too is like, you read that whole part earlier where he talks about the Benoit stuff and how horrific it was. And then the very next paragraph is, and then I had this match with Kenta and it destroyed my eardrum and I basically didn't tone down. And then I got hurt again later. Like it's a pretty dark passage with that framing.
Yeah. I mean, we're lucky that Bryan Danielson got to his retirement in a way where he seems to have a lot of neck problems, but he seems to be living a happy life with his family.
Yeah.
We're very lucky. And a lot of us want Danielson to come back and wrestle, but maybe just maybe the fact that he did all of that he did with his health intact to the degree that it is, maybe we should be happy with what we got. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Honestly, everything after he came back from the concussion things feels almost like we didn't deserve it. Just unbelievable gravy from, that's the title of my book, Unbelievable Gravy. But, unbelievable gravy. Anyway.
Maybe for my 50th birthday, we'll have a gravy party.
Matt, I will show up to that one. I want some unbelievable gravy. So the overall show review, this is obviously a great DVD. There was filler on I would say I enjoyed the Hero Nigel match more than you did on the bonus disc, but really the only essential match on the DVD bonus is Danielson Kenta. But I do dare say, if I had been a fan at the time, obviously no one today has this issue, but if I had been the fan at the time that bought the pay-per-view in September for 10 to 15 bucks. And I was like, do I buy the DVD for another 15 to 20 bucks, a couple months later? It might be worth it just for the Kenta Danielson match. It is a great match.
If you like Ring of Honor style wrestling, you're into it because of the big time great matches. And that's one of them. So yes, I would say.
Yeah. As much as it can be annoying to do, it's almost like I've said this analogy before, the band that puts out the greatest hits and they put out one brand new song to try and get people that already own all the albums to buy it again. That's what they were kind of trying to do here, which in a way feels kind of greasy, but in a way it is a smart business thing, because I think it would have worked on some people being like, I'll buy the pay-per-view and then I've got to see Danielson Kenta. And so overall, I would say pay-per-view is a must watch. You should go out of your way to watch Kenta and Danielson too. Watching the whole DVD won't hurt you at all. It's probably 3 hours 20, I think, and change. But I mean, you can't go wrong, like you said, with two Danielson matches that good.
Agreed.
And so that brings us to the plugs. ThROH@gmail.com for writing us, THROH for through, at Trevor Dame on Twitter, at Mayor MGF on Twitter. Don't forget, Matt had a great appearance on the Q&T podcast reviewing All Out. Next time on the show, we will be covering the next show, as always, which is ROH's first ever show in Japan, live in Tokyo. Nigel takes on Morishima for the world title. There's a whole bunch of other stuff. It'll be very interesting, not just because that show's in Japan. That show is not shot by Ring of Honor. That show is shot by Samurai TV. So we'll be getting a very weird experience for people that have watched every show, because it's going to look more professional in some ways. And it should be fun. So until then, until next time, have a good time. Have a great time. Wolf Mother, Scott D'Amore.